this, that doesn't mean that it's automatically across all those 20 countries either, because there's some slight nuances in EU countries where they say yes, but if this, that. So when they oversimplify it, yeah, that's cool.
And just like that, we're back. Less than 24 hours. BRAP is back. Quick BRAP rant. I do have with me Falky from Australia again. Falky, we made it to Friday, right? The world made it to Friday.
Yeah, certainly did. Friday looks pretty good like yesterday did. Bit of sunshine, beautiful breeze outside. It's pretty cold down this end of the world, but yeah, we're living large, doing well.
Good. I'm happy that the world made it to another day. We live to tell another tale, and yeah. So, but no, Falky, thanks for joining us on a very last minute request. I was like, I know we talked yesterday about getting you back on to discuss the injunction, the FTC injunction hearing of Microsoft Activision, the Microsoft Activision merger. So we're talking a little bit more about that because there was some developing news. Also, I'm going to address, and I would imagine the panel is too, going to address some of the disinformation, misinformation running about. Hence the title here of FTC and Canada collude against Microsoft and Xbox. Talk about that. But also with me, I do have Game Logic. What's going on, Logic?
Not much, man. Hope everybody's doing good here on is it Thursday? It's a Thursday afternoon?
Thursday for us, Friday for Falky.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Also want to give big shout out to everyone in the live chat. What's up to Tony and everyone? Thank you so much. I know this was an impromptu BRAP rant, so I really appreciate you jumping in here in the live chat. I'm going to do if you could do me a quick solid, please retweet the link. Let everyone know that we're live. That we're live. We are live. Planet Earth is alive, but that we are live, not alive. We are live, but you know what I mean. So yeah, we're going to talk about a little bit more about some of the stuff that's come out of the injunction hearing of the FTC trying to block Microsoft and Activision merging. I even talk. I even have a beer. I just cracked open a beer, as a matter of fact. Falky, I'm having a beer right now, by the way. Falky, I don't know if you're. Do you like IPAs? What's your beer choice, Falky?
I like dark beers and very strong beers. I don't like fruity, sweet beers. So IPAs are alright as long as they're down the less fruity version. So the ones with the more bitter types of hops rather than the sweet and fruity types. But I like
you don't like the juicy IPAs,
and ales and
yeah.
No,
Gotcha.
Fruit's for juice, not for beer.
Yeah, no, Falky, I'm not into the darker beers per se, but maybe on occasion I'll have a darker beer. So, AC says Captain and Ginger here. That's some strong stuff. BRAP does not do Captain and Ginger. I stay away from Captain Morgan's, but anyhow. Yeah, but look, what does he say? Thomas Jake says, just kidding, thank the Lord above for the pause button. I don't know what that means. What do you mean by that, Thomas? Oh, and by the way, I guess we had a hot mic earlier before we went live, so apologize for that. I got to figure out. I know we had that last night. Got to figure out what happened. So anyhow, all right. So we're going to talk about some of the stuff that's come out with the FTC's injunction hearing of Microsoft ABK. But I do want to again. I got to say, like it's still disappointing. Some of the coverage, some of the conversation that I am seeing. That I'm seeing on Twitter, unfortunately. There's this idea, Falky and Logic, I know we were discussing earlier, but I don't know if you've seen it, Falky, that, the people really have picked up the ball with this narrative that somehow it is Sony's fault that Microsoft isn't able to compete, that they are targeting Xbox for locking up third-party exclusives to keep games off the platform. Now, I would say, yeah, well, that makes sense because Sony probably views Xbox as its main competitor or its closest competitor in the console space, right? But let's also remember that it is Microsoft too. And Logic, you brought this up last night. It is also Microsoft who has the resources and the ability to compete, and they've actually chosen not to compete, not to try to get involved in a bidding war, if you will. And I always bring up the article by Imran Khan at the start of this generation, who said he had heard through various sources, publishers, that in fact Sony was actually outbidding Xbox by quite a bit for third-party exclusivity deals. So Microsoft was having these conversations with publishers. They just didn't want to pay the money that Sony was paying, and so that is a Microsoft decision. And so I guess to me the irony of a $1 trillion company somehow not being able to compete against a $1 billion company isn't lost on me. Like it's like what are we doing here? Like somehow that is Sony's ability to bully Microsoft is the reason why Xbox is doing poorly. I have to say I disagree with that. It is Microsoft's own choices in the console space. We go back to the launch of the Xbox One, the fact that they had more recently they've had issues with their first party production pipeline. They've had issues. They closed studios and then they decided to hit the reset button and then they released Game Pass and they decided to build more studios to invest in first party again. So, they've been in the business 20 years and they've kind of hit the reset button. And look, I don't disagree that Game Pass is a tremendous value proposition for those that are interested in it, but for a certain segment of the market out there. But I'm not buying into this that, oh, poor Xbox, poor Microsoft, they can't compete against Sony. I'm just not I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that, considering that Microsoft is a $1 trillion company and we see what Microsoft's doing now. Now, I also don't disagree, like Game Logic has said, and I'm going to kind of rehash some of these things because I know that we're going to get people that are listening who are going to say, oh, you're against Xbox locking up exclusive content, and no, we're not. No one in this panel has said that. We are all for competition. We believe that it's actually okay and understand the business reasons why. Game Logic, if you didn't listen to last night's BRAP, please check it out because Game Logic actually irons it out, the reasons or why it makes sense for Microsoft or Xbox to have acquired ZeniMax Bethesda. But also, we've also laid out the conversation of why potentially buying ABK could be the tipping point as to Microsoft becoming maybe a little bit too aggressive and the potential negative impacts in the marketplace with mass consolidation to consumers into the gaming industry. Also want to discuss, Falky, because you were talking about this earlier, the interaction that the regulatory agencies have, because a lot of people are making comments. I got to be honest with you. I think the disappointing thing with me and what I've seen with the Xbox community, and it happens in the PlayStation community as well, but for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to bring up the Xbox community, is that they're getting their information from people who aren't even subject matter experts.
Yeah.
Like some of the stuff that's going out here is what, like, for example, today, Canada responded to Microsoft's to Microsoft's commentary on what the Canadian government had said about this merger and acquisition, or this merger or acquisition, I should say, of ABK. And they basically came out and corrected Microsoft's legal team and say, no, that's actually not what we said. Here's what we said. And people looked at that, and all Canada was doing is correcting the misinformation that Microsoft put out there. Canada responded saying, no, this is actually what we said. Actually, Steve, if you follow Steve Totilo from Axios, he actually reported this. He's the first one I saw report this, and he actually highlighted and mentioned that Canada was responding to some misinformation that Microsoft had put out there. And that's all Canada was doing. They were simply correcting this. Now, Microsoft replies to the Canadian government, you missed your window of opportunity to block the deal, et cetera, et cetera. I wouldn't expect anything less from the Microsoft attorneys to say that. But that's not really the point, Microsoft attorneys. That's not what Canada was saying. They were just correcting some misinformation. But the Xbox community put on their tinfoil hats and somehow connected the dots and, oh, wait a minute, Canada released this document, and then the CMA tried to delay the appeal hearing with the tribunal. Something's going on here. It's collusion. The FTC's colluding with Canada. They're colluding against Xbox and Microsoft. The fix is in. And people were and I'm like, first of all, the one thing this deal highlighted is that there's a lot of people that are grossly misinformed and have no idea of how the regulatory process works, how the free market works. They don't understand economies of scale. They don't understand the potential impact to consumers of mass consolidation. No one has done their homework. No one has done their homework. And when you do present them with well thought out analysis of this whole thing, they try to shout you down and shut you up. Because God forbid, if you put out accurate information out there, or if you present an informed, educated perspective. Captain Crunch, no, I don't have to stay off Twitter, sir. It's a public space. It is a social media platform.
It's very entertaining.
It is very entertaining. But it also highlights the stupidity of a lot of people around this deal. This deal has exposed the lack of IQ, and it's exposed this tremendous, like this level of tribalism. And I will say this, Falky, if you're not following what's happening here in the U.S., and they are more important things, speaking of court cases, that have happened today in the U.S., that people should probably pay closer attention of, that actually have potentially negative impacts on the lives of people. Not this luxury item of console gaming.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Falk.
Yeah, there's some stuff going on in the US, not just in court cases, but in the economy in general, that a few people should really start to be paying attention to, because it's not sunshine and rainbows on the horizon. But that's a discussion for another subject for another day. The social media gives every person who has access to it the ability to have an opinion expressed. Now, whether that's listened to or not, it depends on your platform you're using and how many people agree or follow or all the rest of it, or how well you can promote it. But what it's also done is it allows, the volume of shout down to increase. So those that actually know what's going on, who have the sense and the capabilities to express their common sense approach and the knowledge of how the systems work and how the game is played, so to speak, they get drowned out by all the opinionated influence type people who are just happy to shout it. And the louder you shout it on social media, the more true it must be. So there's there's a huge amount of misinformation. And I find it quite entertaining, just scrolling through and just seeing how wrong and genuinely wrong people are. And there's been some serious individuals that have got a large followings on Twitter and YouTube and other platforms that actually work for proper media outlets that have had to walk back some of their comments and correct themselves because they've misinterpreted or they've misunderstood or they just don't know what it means. And as soon as people deviate away from this is what was said and into the this is what it means, and they don't know what it means or in the context of it, or provide the full context, they're just asking themselves for trouble. Yeah, the Canada thing was quite amusing. I thought it was I had a good chuckle at that, and then I saw Microsoft's response, and I thought that was pretty piss weak. But yeah, then people start up about jurisdictions and all the rest of it. I mentioned it briefly yesterday, and I'll repeat it again today.
Hold on, I'm sorry, Falky. Apex Predator, good sir, says BRAP. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, for you're no better either. You probably don't know how the government works and could be giving people misinformation too, because I doubt you know anything about this. So Apex, first and foremost, I definitely know more than you. I do know how the government works because I've taken time to actually research how the government works. I've actually looked at historical cases by the FTC. I've discussed in nuance with game logic about how the FTC's operated 20, 30, 40 years ago. I think, Logic, you've done a little more research than I have, but I've had those informed discussions. So I do know how government works. I've done homework. I've done research. Why do you think I have Falky on here? I know what Falky does professionally. That's one of the reasons I have him on here. Why do you think I have Game Logic on here? Because I know what Game Logic does professionally. It's to provide a more informed perspective and conversation to the viewers who tune in here every week. Now, I may not know to the extent that Joe Biden knows how the government works, but I have a pretty good foundation understanding of how the government works. The checks and balances, the systems we have in place here in the United States. I can tell that you don't know how it works is a comment you're making. Because you've been listening to the show for the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we've been talking about this. And I'm willing to bet that on this show, we haven't been putting out misinformation, disinformation, and trying to mislead people. What we have been trying to do is have informed conversation about this merger and acquisition. But then you get people like you, Apex, who come in here and try to derail the conversation because you're tied to a plastic box. Brian M., I don't disagree with you. Today, Joe Biden may not know where he is, but leave Sleepy Joe alone. But I can tell you, I definitely know more than those people who are going out here and accusing Canada and the FTC of collusion. I also understand that these regulatory bodies do communicate with one another. Thank you, Tactical Gamer. Go ahead, Falky.
It's entertaining. I'm just trying to figure out, and I say this in jest, if Apex Predator is a actual individual, if it's not an AI bot that lives in YouTube, only because every time I show up on your show, he shows up in the chat and starts tearing in about the complete opposite perspective. But all jokes aside, yeah, some of us actually have worked or do work for government regulatory bodies, so we're pretty knowledgeable about how these things work. But for the collusion piece, to leave that segment behind, the global companies, so any of the top 150 global companies, if you like, they'll operate in over 100 countries, right? So they'll operate in countries that they're not even registered to operate in, depending on what they do.
Yeah.
So for like Microsoft, they're multiple EU countries, Asia, Australia, Pacific, Oceania, US, Northern America, Southern America, Africa. They're on every continent. I think Microsoft is one of 8 companies in the world that actually have a presence on Antarctica, so they are genuinely in every continent on the planet. So they it's they're in a unique spot. But any company that operates in multiple countries has the challenge of needing to meet the regulatory requirements and the legal requirements of every individual country. And when globalization was taking off in the late 70s, early 80s, a lot of countries realized, or companies were asking countries, can you be more like similar countries so that we don't have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to get set up in different places? Because to be fair, there are global companies that do benefit society in general by having more relaxed access to be able to work across the globe. Parts of the healthcare, parts of transport, parts of services, those sort of companies, right? Now, whether they do it in a good
Playboy
manner
magazine.
or not, that's not... Well, you know, you can't single out individuals, but yeah. But in entertainment is probably a better way of saying global entertainment streaming. But what that eventuated in was you get things like the OECD and you know, the International Monetary Fund and those guys starting to get together. People get involved, countries get involved, all their regulatory bodies get involved, and they start to take a process of changing their legislation and their regulatory rules to try and be very similar to each other so companies don't have to deviate so much. What the trade-off to that is, all those regulatory bodies across all those countries need to be able to communicate with each other to maintain what's going on. It's not uncommon for every competition regulatory body to get together 4 or 5 times a year, like in person, that frequently.
I was told that was collusion.
Market.
Falky, I was told that was collusion.
Well, collusion and cooperation, people really need to get a dictionary out. I think the Americans call it the Webster's. Go to your Webster's and get out your dictionary. And it's an unusual one because in Australia, Webster's used to be a big chemist and pharmaceuticals.
I was going to say, Falky, you don't have Webster's in the Webster's dictionary in Australia, then?
No, we speak the Queen's Good Convict English over here. So, well, the King's Good Convict English now.
That's a.
We have the Oxford. We go by the Oxford Dictionary. So
I thought it's funny you called it the King's Convict Dictionary. That's funny.
You'd be surprised. We get the Brits give it to us a lot. They like to refer to us as convicts first and humans second. So
that's wow. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's good. It's all good fun. And apologies if that offends anyone, but I really don't care. The point is, when they all get together to have these conversations about, it's designed to be about emerging concerns across what global companies are doing, if there are concerns, or to highlight any changes in legislation due to changes in how the world is working, right? So if you get someone like Microsoft that goes, and we'll use this as the case in point, they said the deal goes through provided we get agreement from 42 different or 50 something regulatory bodies. So, and most, like they've said in the last couple of days, there's 40 regulatory bodies that had no problems with it. Like, well, in those 40 countries or those 40 sovereignty jurisdictions, Microsoft has got no real standing in the competition in that area, or Xbox doesn't, because of reason X, Y, and Z. Mostly because they're either, like Japan, not considered competition, so they're not going to say, no, you can't do it, because they've got no real standing in the market. Or places like Brazil, where they are looking, their rules are saying, looking very specifically at, does this mean less value for consumers? Well, if you're going to put everything in Game Pass and charge nothing for it, well, that's better value for the consumer, but it doesn't give them more choice. So it comes down to, what are they actually looking at when they're doing their review, and how what's the broader impact on their individual market. But they still need to have a set of rules that they're all working towards, which are similar. Otherwise, you'd get 50-something different responses, and then you'd have Microsoft or Xbox sitting there going, right, well, we can operate in those 40, but those 40 are only about 5% of our revenue. we can't operate in that one because it's 20% of our revenue, so we're going to have to not do that. And then the main one, which is the US, is 60-something% of our revenue, and we're going, or North America. Canada's 10%, US is 50%, 60%. Well, Canada said they're still looking at it, but they're not comfortable, and the US has indicated they don't want us to do it, so we're going to have to fight tooth and nail to do it. But if they lose in the US, then they're basically left. Would they then go, all right, well, the 40 countries that said we can, we'll just operate in there? Because they would have lost 90-something% of their revenue. This is the complexities of it that a lot of people with their tinfoil hats on don't understand, is it's not necessarily the number of countries that say yes or no, it's the volume of business impact or the percentage of their revenue generation. And people can say whatever they like. The bottom line is the dollar, and if the dollar's not showing up in a positive manner, they'll stop doing it eventually. They will not carry on. And the trial has shown that they're basically been told ABK is going to make money from day one. Well, they can't cut out PlayStation, and now that's been shown as that's the part, it's been put on the stand, Sony's got absolutely no reason now to agree to any 10-year deal. Because why would Sony give up money to just satisfy what Microsoft needs to do? Microsoft is basically bound.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry. Can I inject real quick? That's actually a great point, because a lot of people throughout this process were saying, why isn't Jim Ryan taking this 10-year deal? It's great. It's a great deal. Well, for the reasons you just mentioned, they both need each other. I mean, Sony does need Call of Duty. Call of Duty needs Sony. It's a relationship where they need one another to make money, you know? Yeah. And so, you know, we know that majority of the players are on the PlayStation console for Call of Duty. Bobby Kotick basically said, look, if a platform owner was to acquire Call of Duty and pull it from another platform, there would be I don't know if he said a revolt by gamers or the market, but basically like that platform holder's reputation would be damaged in the market. It would have the opposite effect.
Yeah,
so go ahead. Yeah. But that's why that's why Jim Ryan's like, no, I'm like, no, like if you read Jim Ryan's email, like he talks about like having like, hey, look, it's fine. You want to bring that you're going to bring PlayStation. I'm paraphrasing his email, right. But Jim Ryan does bring up like, look, like no, like you're not going to put Call of Duty at a later release date on PlayStation. You're not going to put it in Game Pass because Game Pass could potentially lead to a partial foreclosure would be partial foreclosure strategy on Microsoft's part. So he admits those things, but you could tell in the conversation if you take the green goggles off or the purple blue goggles off. It's funny, both sides on any given day will claim victory, which is ridiculous. But I think what's been really interesting about what's come out of this is that you kind of get a lot of inside baseball, as we say here, into how the sausage is made, how these deals are negotiated, how the executives view these games and how they're important to their platforms. But to your point, like if you're PlayStation and the majority of people play Call of Duty on your platform, and you know Activision needs your platform to be successful, the Call of Duty to be successful, you're going to balk at a 10-year deal because you don't need to take it.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Falky. I just wanted to. That was a great point you brought up. So.
Oh, you're right. I'll just finish off the point about the collusion piece, because we tend to deviate a lot when we talk. So the collusion it refers to, or the idea of collusion refers to that there's a secret or illegal cooperation of conspiracy in order to deceive others. How are the regulatory bodies deceiving others when they're very open about, this is what we're looking at, this is who we're talking to, this is why we have a concern? It's public information. Yes, they have to keep it quiet while they're conducting it, but they keep it quiet for the purpose of purity of the review. The CMA, very open at regular intervals about who said what and what the responses were available. And when they were talking to people, and the time was, the FTC's been the same, as the ACCC here in Australia basically went as far as they could, and there's various different reasons for this, but they went, all right, cool. We've launched an investigation. We've gotten some information. We're now going to put it on hold until the big guys come out and tell us what they're doing. Being the CMA, the EU, the FTC, and some others, because they all follow a very similar rule set. And I would be very, very surprised if anyone actually did the deep dive themselves and saw that any country that is basically part of the British Empire or is a Commonwealth country, we've all got very similar rules and very similar regulations and laws. It'd be very difficult to get a large discrepancy between what, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK, Malaysia, India, and a dozen other countries will do. They may have differences in the reach or in the impact that they can review it. Activision and Microsoft Xbox don't have a division in Australia, so Australia can only review it from a consumer competition perspective. So it's extremely limited in what it can and can't do. Hence the reason why they said, we're just going to put it on pause and wait and see what comes of it, because they can't actually get in front of it. They would have to make a decision after the deal has been agreed or disagreed to then put a position out, because they don't actually have the money or the resources to go ahead and do any kind of oversight like the EU is. They're basically bound like the CMA, where CMA's got the same problem. They go, we don't have the funding to be able to do any kind of administration to oversee this thing to make sure it doesn't cause an issue. So we're just going to say no. Because again, I reiterate, what the EU found and what the CMA found was almost identical. The only difference was how they worded it in their releases. They did almost identical reviews, almost identical outcomes. The only difference was the CMA couldn't afford to do the concessions, and the EU was, because it's got deeper pockets and it's got more of a vested interest. But people saying, the CMA should be running and cowering and they're going to get belted up in their in the court case and the appeal by the CAT, not necessarily, because it's not just the CMA and the EU who have had similar findings. Canada has expressed very similar concerns in their detailed reports, almost identical. And the FTC, again, almost identical. But they've got slightly different rule sets that they need to look into. So is it collusion? Well, how can it be? They're not doing it in order to deceive or act in an illegal manner. They're working together to a common goal at the request, might I point out, of companies like Microsoft in the first instance, to make the playing field easier to be able to operate globally. You can't ask for a rule set and then complain about the rule set. It's like what Ferrari used to do in Formula One back when Michael Schumacher was beating everyone senseless. They'd press to have a set of rules, and as soon as they'd start getting beaten, they'd complain about the rule set that they basically paid to have. Red Bull does the same thing these days. They push to get rules that benefit them, and when people start to beat them, they start complaining. They focusing on the console stuff. It's CMA. This is why I think it's funny. The CMA, the EU, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, most of them, even the ones that have said yes, have said, look, in terms of the console zone, no problem. Competition, great. And even Jim Ryan has said in some of his email responses, he doesn't have an issue with the competition part of it in the console space. They welcome it, bring it on, let's have a go at it. No problems there. The issue has always been in what does the level of control turn out to be, and how are they going to exercise that control? And it's particularly in the cloud and streaming space. And the tinfoil hats have said nothing about that, because they know as soon as they speak up, bang, Microsoft is dominant in the PC gaming area. Bang, Microsoft is dominant in the cloud gaming area. Bang, Microsoft is dominant in the game subscription zone. And they don't want to talk about that because it makes them appear like the one that's leading in those markets is complaining about the rule set that allowed them to get there. So, yeah, collusion? No, it's not collusion. Go and get a dictionary and learn what it means. It's cooperation, and that cooperation stemmed from these companies asking for it.
Yeah, no, that's a great explanation, by the way, because I think a lot of people don't understand that perspective or how these regulatory bodies work with one another. And also, like you mentioned the countries, because that was something that was, I don't know if you saw it in the live chat last night, but that was something that was often kind of thrown out there. Oh, well, 40 other regulatory bodies approved. But like you said, it really isn't. It's not as important as the number approved. It's the I forgot what you said early, Falky. I'm sorry. You said a lot. What was it? It's not the number of countries per se. It's not economic impact.
Not the number of countries. It's the value of what those countries can generate.
Exactly. So, that was a great point. So Hamp, we talked a little bit about the collusion stuff. By the way, I gotta say, Hamp, that gift that you posted earlier, the barbecue, beer, and freedom, that shirt is still on sale at Walmart today, sir.
A lot of ugly Americans out today on Twitter.
Yes, exactly. Like I saw that guy yelling, and I'm like, this is and that shirt is on sale at Walmart. Unfortunately, I didn't see it at first. I took a second glance. I'm like, oh my god, and I was in tears, crying, laughing. Hey, what are your thoughts about today's developments?
I think the two things I'd say is that number one, so Capono asked a really good question in the chat, and he came in a little late and was asking, some say Canada has passed the deadline, and is that true? And that is true, but the caveat to that is they have passed the deadline, but they also have not approved the merger. And I put some notes in the chat about, at least for now, my level of understanding of how it works. And admittedly, I have not done a lot of thorough research into Canadian antitrust regulation. But what it does say and what it mentions corroborates with the letter that they turned in today, which is that they're continuing to look at it. And what that means is that there's a waiting period after notification, and after that expires, the companies can proceed with the merger. However, the Bureau can continue their review, and if the Bureau comes to a determination that the merger is problematic, they can still come back and retroactively say that, hey, some things need to be changed. And that's similar to what we saw in, I can't remember, was it the UK or the EU who told Facebook to that they had to give Giphy back? Yeah. And so these regulatory agencies have the ability to retroactively go back and revisit a merger and say, yeah, no, this is not good for consumers. So again, this is the ask for levity and to maybe come off of the spike the football, WWE, backyard wrestling. I'm going to whoop and holler because Uncle Jethro has jumped off the roof of the house onto the dirty mattress in the backyard. And calm down a little bit and consider these things a little more academically. I think the other thing I really wanted to point out tonight, and this is more about the discussion of, the continuing discussion of whether or not this merger is good for all gamers. And I think the position I've always taken is the jury's out. I'm interested in hearing anyone's argument that it is good for all gamers, but every time somebody enters an argument, there are scenarios to refute it. I love having the conversation, but no one has yet, neither Microsoft nor any fan, to talk me through a case that points out that this is good for all gamers. And I think one of the analogies that I stumbled on today, which I thought would be really good to talk through, and I apologize for never having thought about this before, was to talk about the government's own experiences in LPTA. And so LPTA is lowest price technically acceptable. That is an acquisition term for a methodology that the government instituted a few years ago to contract for services, do procurements, etc. And I was in an argument with somebody today who didn't understand how could it possibly be bad for prices for prices to be lowered for people to access content. Took the position that had to be a universal good, and said that by way of my expressing concern about the things that could occur if that would happen, that I was trying to protect Sony, or that somehow I was interested in keeping prices high, or just a bunch of foolishness. So I want to talk a little bit through LPTA. So the government went down this path of LPTA, and since then they have walked back from LPTA, and where LPTA for a long time was how they were telling people to procure things within the government. Years later, they have seen the bad of that and have walked that back, and now it's actually only allowed to be utilized for very hyper-specific acquisitions. And largely those are acquisitions around commodities, things where there's not a lot of differentiation in the market on the products available. The reason and the things that they learned is that by trying to acquire things from a market of government contractors at the lowest price and things that barely met people's needs, what they got a lot of bad stuff. They got a lot of low value, low quality stuff. One of the things I was trying to talk to this person about today is, not all of us who are in games want the products that are the least expensive and barely meet our consumer requirements for what we want in a video game. We don't necessarily want the market to race to zero. We don't necessarily want these things to be driven down to a commodity. And what I was trying to explain to them is kind of the same thing that I talked some of you guys through last night, which is Call of Duty is now going to need to go to 2 other platforms. Microsoft is going to have to add resources in order to make that increase in scope feasible for Activision to achieve. The definition in software engineering is that if I increase scope and maintain schedule, that something's got to give. And the thing that's going to give is going to be quality. So the only way you maintain that is to add more resources. The problem is that historically, particularly this generation, Microsoft has shown a trend of behavior where it has failed to add sufficient professional resources to guarantee the quality release of a video game. That's not something I'm making up. That's fact. So I don't know why anyone would argue with that. So based on that, my concern is very high that would continue to happen under an Activision acquisition, where Microsoft has promised to more widely distribute COD on more platforms. So right there is a scenario where someone who plays Call of Duty and doesn't consume it through Game Pass is negatively impacted potentially by this deal. Therefore, unfurling the notion that this thing is good for all consumers. The fact of the matter is that the only argument that's been levied at this point is this deal is good for good for consumers who are going to get onto the Xbox platform, into the Xbox ecosystem, and procure it from Game Pass. And that's only if those consumers are ones who don't have a concern for quality, right? That's a problem, right? That's driving choice for consumers out of the equation. The other risk, as I mentioned last night, is that now that Microsoft is doing that, more widely distributing COD, which is already a beast, that fewer companies are incentivized to invest the resources to make competitive products that compete directly with COD. Why would they bother? Again, less choice for consumers, right? So going back to the LPTA thing, again.
Wait, real quick. I'm sorry, Lars.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I think I do want to add something in here, because you're not saying these are things that are definitively going to happen, right? You're saying that these are things that could happen as a result of the acquisition going through, right?
Well, I mean, you're leading me down the point of the argument that we were having, right?
I want to make that clear, because I think a lot of the issue that I'm having with people having this conversation about this deal is that they are just jumping to definitive conclusions.
Well, and so the argument is that like that this individual threw back at me was, okay, so you're predicting all these things are going to happen. You're telling me you can see the future. And I'm like, no, but you have to understand the actual role of a regulatory agency. The role of a regulatory agency, when you boil it down and strip away all the politics, is they are a risk mitigation organization. That is their job. They are supposed to basically fill out the bingo card, determine the risk, determine the likelihood, and determine the impact. None of us can foretell the future. And the problem I have with that argument, and this is what I just recently posted on Twitter, is a lot of the people who are proponents of this deal are using their claims as an attempt to say that they are proving the null hypothesis. And what that is what they're trying to say is, By the fact that I'm saying that you don't know what's going to happen, that means those things won't happen and therefore it's okay. And I'm like, no, you can't say that, because what you're really saying by virtue of saying that is that you are also predicting a happy path in a way in which all of this works out just fine. So you are also making a prediction, right? This is the gaslight effort to try and tell one person that their logic is flawed, when the reality is they are themselves using a flawed logic argument.
That's a great point, Logic.
So back to the LPTA thing. My whole point is that when you take a market and you drive prices down and you do race to the bottom, and I'm not saying this to support the Jim Ryan statement that Jim Ryan's got to prove what he said, which is that that it devalues the market. What I'm talking about is the actual lesson learned from LPTA, but that in that market, when you drive prices down, what you get is a lot of people producing low quality products that aren't highly differentiated, that don't necessarily meet the requirements of some of the consumers in the market. And so the consumers in the market who are only concerned about price and don't care about all the other factors, features, performance, quality, those people are satisfied because all they care about is that they can access a thing at a low price. But the rest of the consumer market who has requirements for those other things, they're not getting what they need. Therefore, that is a negative impact on those consumers in the market. So my problem is, and I think the thing that I fell on today is that I think the reality is that there are a lot of people who are proponents of the deal who are really only considering the short-term impact that's literally 5 feet in front of their face. The only thing they care about is, I can access a thing at a low price. Today, that's not a problem. That's all I care about. But they're not taking into account that the concerns of the rest of us, some of us, and that inherently the job of some of the regulatory agencies is to consider the long-term impact, so that they don't do things like fail to act, and I've commented on this before, and wind up with the things that we have today that have been proven to be universal bads for consumers. Consolidation of the music industry, consolidation of ISPs, consolidation of cell phone companies, consolidations of large media conglomerates. We have multiple instances where we've shown that driving the value, driving the price down in a market winds up not being a universal good for all consumers.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's like you said, I think a lot of people are looking at this at the short term. And when they criticize the FTC, look, I think that, if someone was to ask me an opinion, like, what do you Brad, what are your thoughts about the FTC using Call of Duty as one of the talking points in the case? I think that might prove to be a tough case to argue in light of what Bobby Kotick has said about, COD and Phil Spencer, again, reassuring. I think he reassures now, but I'm not totally buying that Microsoft wouldn't pull Call of Duty away from PlayStation at some point in the not this generation, but at some point in the future. Like, why wouldn't you if you're Microsoft, right? Like, you spend $70 billion. I get, like, look, if this thing's going to make you, this thing's going to, go ahead, Falky. I heard you chiming in there. Go ahead, man.
Some of the information that's coming out, and I agree, you're saying if they made it exclusive, it would have, this impact, that impact. Yes, they've done the modeling, as has been seen in some of those corresponding points out of this case. That modeling, from what I understand, is they're talking doubling, potentially more, the Game Pass subscription cost per month, and expecting nearly 150-something% increase on subscription numbers. Like, the modeling is fantasy. It ain't gonna happen. Not in the time frame that they would need it to happen. And it would take some serious, and I mean some serious, changes of gamers' behavior to be able to do that.
So
the COD stuff.
So you're saying that you don't think that, because I've always thought at some point the numbers will catch up, will make sense, where you could pull COD off of PlayStation, where you don't need PlayStation anymore at some point.
Oh,
and
I need 40.
Yeah, go ahead.
You'd need somewhere between 45 and 50 million subscribers paying $40 a month. Do you see anyone doing that with the conditioning that they've given to their current player base?
Not at the moment, but I guess the question is Call of Duty enough of a juggernaut in the industry to get people to make that leap over to Xbox? If in fact Xbox,
it would make people. Yeah, it would make. Sorry, apologies for the cutting over. I've got a horrible delay with the internet today, and we are talking from opposite sides of the planet, so you know, the impact. Yes, people would move, and there's been modelling done in America and the UK and the EU and all that. That you know, the same sort of modelling they do for every other thing that they want to do. Modelling for it's indicated that people would move, but from PlayStation to Xbox in the droves that Xbox would need them to, no, they would be flat out getting if they got a third of people to go, that would be a great result. But they need more than that. So there's something else. You know, COD's not the driver. There's something else that offsets the back end of it. But you know, let's not forget. Everyone says, "Oh, Sony needs Call of Duty." Well, yeah, 500 million net, 800 million gross revenue coming from Call of Duty in the PlayStation's back pocket, and PlayStation's only got to do the marketing. $800 million is for their like we've seen again, their AAA games, top shelf games cost about 200 million plus to make. $800 million a year is 4 games fully funded every year for Sony. Now,
well, that's what Activision gets out of it, right? So
no, that's the Sony side. Activision gets 1.5 billion plus, and that's net bookings. So that's after Sony's taken out and Steam have taken out their chunks. So if you wanted to gross that up, the actual gross revenue impact to Activision, if COD wasn't on PlayStation, is in excess of $2 billion.
That's a lot of money.
Their profit margin in the last 2 years was less than $1 billion. You take that off PlayStation, straight away you've bought a loss situation. And that's a lot of money to recoup. So, yeah, people can carry on and say demand exclusivity because that's the right thing to do in terms of value for the customer, and value's again subjective. But if they went, right, if their gamers expect day and date on Game Pass, and that the Game Pass is not going to increase its cost, and they're going to get everything the same that they thought they were going to have, not just for COD, but for everything that Activision would be doing, if that is their expectation, they are going to be severely disappointed in about 3 years' time. Severely disappointed. The quality degradation would be astronomical, and the playability of the games would be impacted, and the size and scope of the games would be impacted. And all comes down to money, and people don't like that conversation. And I've had it said to me a lot of times, "Oh, every time we talk to you, all you want to do is talk business, just talk games." Like, every time we get into a discussion about games, there's always a question around quality, playability, serviceability, access, blah, 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 blah. And it all comes down to one thing: money.
Money. Yeah, exactly. Remember what Optimus Code used to say about game development?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, he
had some really good positions on that.
He was right. I mean, money, resources, talent, tools, all that. I mean, all that. I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned, money, and something Logic's brought up. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt Logic, and maybe this is where you're going, but one of the things you brought up, Logic, was that requiring Activision to develop Call of Duty for multiple platforms now, that could maybe potentially cause some issues, right? I think that's what you said. I don't want to misquote you, but
yeah, what do you mean in terms of quality of the Call of Duty franchise?
Exactly. Yes, in terms of quality. Yeah, because now you're adding additional. Look, we've heard developers say, look, it's at times the preference is developed for the less platforms you have to develop for, the better optimization, the less in terms of cost, things like that. But yeah, I don't want to misquote you, Logic. So just
No, that's
something. Yeah, go ahead.
That's accurate. I mean, again, to go back to what I said earlier, what you're talking about is you're talking about increasing the scope of a software development program, and that has certain defined meanings within software engineering that aren't optional, right? There's no argument about those. And so, yeah, I mean, and then, if you really tie that to what I've talked about, as far as I can perceive is kind of the Microsoft master strategy, right? Which is that the kind of inherent development framework and delivery of these games for the Xbox platform, at least, is going to go through a pretty radical transformation, right? In terms of, the goal, if I use Call of Duty as the guinea pig, right, as the prototype, as the test baby, right? If that's the game that is supposed to help them culminate their grand strategy, which is to have games that can deploy to mobile, cloud, PC, and the console, and have communities with high MAU, that inherently means also, and this is what they've said, that those players have to be able to play that game at parity, which means in the case of a Call of Duty, the player who plays on mobile has to be competitive against the player who's playing on PC. The player who's playing on cloud has to be competitive with the person who's playing on Xbox. That means a lot of radical changes in the way games are built, in the way TTK arbitration happens, in the way ballistics happen, in the way latency is handled. A very significant change. But that is where Microsoft is talking about they're going. The short-term impact of that is, if you're not in that ecosystem, but you are drinking off the same tap, the likelihood is that you're going to be negatively impacted. That is just a historic case with software development. We see that with things like Windows, right? The new version of Windows typically tends to come out with fewer features than the previous version of Windows did, because what they want to do is they want to get the game out. They want to get the operating system out with some notional degree of stability. And then over time, they blend those features back in. So you're not going to see a radical change, a transformative change in the way games are being made to suit the Xbox ecosystem, while people who are drinking off the same tap aren't concurrently negatively impacted. You're not going to see a high-end, high-fidelity Call of Duty on PlayStation, while the Xbox version, which is going to multiple platforms, takes a notional 2 steps back in order to reposition and get to a place where it can platform off to become this new transformation. So, I mean, unless you add tons of resources to help manage through that, then that's where you're going to see slippages. And like I said, before, Microsoft has shown a historic penchant of not aligning resources and not adding resources that are needed in a timely manner.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The other
go ahead,
the other point to add to that as well is the impact of the idea of the notion that they want to shift everything to a standard back-end platform for development that leverages their Azure systems, and the new versions of that. You're asking talent, so to speak, engineers, to go, right, we're going to go from what we currently know really well to something completely unknown and in its infancy stages, to be able to achieve exactly the same thing as what we've been able to get our current engines and systems to do, and we need to be able to roll it out across multiple different solutions. And to be honest, how is a PlayStation going to run something that was built on Azure? So there's then a requirement to take it and modify it again to make it work elsewhere. Some of the stuff that they've been talking about doing is just completely asinine, but it does set them up with the excuse to say, this is too bloody difficult, we're just not going to do it. And that's their get out of jail free card.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that scenario play out. I mean, where Microsoft says, look, we gave them the opportunity to get on the platform, but the difficulty of doing so led to Sony saying, you know what, we're done, and Microsoft saying, hey, we gave them the opportunity, now they're done. That's on them. I mean,
I'll quickly just tie this into the other
Sure.
piece very quickly. Having said that, right, so we've established that. Now, you go back to the EU's outcome and what their requirement was. Their requirement was that the games be made available, fee-free licensing, to any platform of streaming where the consumer wants to consume it. Which means that there's no incentive there for Sony to sign a 10-year deal in the EU for anything, right, at all. As long as the EU concessions stay in effect, PlayStation gets access by default, because there's obviously current consumers that want to consume that product on that platform.
Hey,
So
real
Microsoft,
quick, Falky,
if this deal closed...
Falky, I'm sorry. Real quick, I just want to highlight something you just said. You talked about the licensing fee, because that's kind of one of the things that kind of pushed this approval over the finish line for the EU. Again, we go back to concessions. This is one of those concessions that Microsoft agreed to that the EU wanted to happen. I think that's important to note, because this deal with the FTC, and I think it will go through. I think it's going to go through with concessions, though. But I wanted to highlight that because a lot of people, when they talk about the EU improving it, they often describe a situation where the EU just approved it with no concessions, and that's not what happened. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Oh, you're right. And important to highlight that note, because the fee-free component of those concessions makes all the 10-year deals effectively in the EU useless. Absolutely useless. They're pretty much not worth the paper they're written on for most of them in the EU, in that EEA zone. But what it does mean is that there's a requirement for Microsoft to develop a game on Parity for the PlayStation that is able to be streamed to consumers at a bare minimum. So they have to spend the money to do it. How do you stream something from on PlayStation? It has to be on one of their back-end servers and available, which means it has to be built to run on a server blade made by AWS. What is Amazon Web Services? Their server systems and their cloud banks. It's a direct competitor to Microsoft. So it's an interesting point of wedging them to make more consumer friendly from a consumer friendly perspective, I should say. But the regulator in the EU has basically said, all right, well, we're going to basically fiddle around with you guys. It has to be available over here, and you have to build it to their specs, not your specs. Now, if Microsoft says that's too costly and that's too expensive, we're not going to do it, they could technically be in breach of that concession, which means the whole thing can be unwound at the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
Would you sign up to something like that?
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to what Logic was saying, that at some point, the regulatory bodies, because everyone says, oh, if this deal goes through, it's a slam dunk. I mean, at some point, these regulatory agencies, we talked about it a lot on this show, they can always go back and say, wait a minute, we need to revisit this. Yes, we approved, or yes, you agreed to these concessions, but you're not living up to your agreement with the concessions, or you've gotten too big and it's hurting competition. We need to break this thing up. There are examples of the FTC, by the way, doing this. We talk about the telecom mergers in the early 80s. Who was the big player? Game Logic. It was it GTE? Is that one?
Yeah, GTE was one of them. Yep.
Bell South, Bell, whatever.
Ma Bell.
I feel like there was
Ma Bell.
Bell West, Bell East, Bell North. I mean, Bell was everywhere. I remember that.
But
and then AT&T was another one. Yeah.
Yeah, and just again to close out the point. This is a minefield. Again, the EU requires this. The CMA said no. Canada said we're still monitoring it. We don't like it, but Canada's, the time frame expired. No, a regulator can step in at any time and say this is not okay from our and per our rules. This is going to happen, and if you don't like it, fuck off, basically, because that's the reality of why regulatory bodies exist. And I've got experience having worked for one, how vicious they can get when they want to. And you don't want to piss them off, because if the rules don't suit them, and again, this is something that a lot of people with the tinfoil hats need to understand. If a company is, if a regulatory body cannot exercise its authority in the way it's intended, they will change the legislation so that they can come back and do it later. And it has happened frequently.
Yeah. It definitely has. I mean, that's the other thing. People. So this is Falky. This is. I'm glad we're having this conversation. This is part of my frustration. You discussed the historical context here, and logic. We just brought up GTE, Ma Bell, mergers, acquisitions that were approved that eventually got broken up. And Nate mentions AT&T was forced to break up. People are like, what's really frustrating, it's almost like, one, you haven't been paying attention the last 20 years in the gaming industry. Two, you're not even going back and looking at maybe why the regulatory bodies might have concerns. You're also not looking at the tremendous growth and influence that big tech has had, not just in the United States, but globally. And so I don't, and I said this last night, I think it's fair to question these big acquisitions by big tech to be able to go into other industries. Let's face it, like if you're Amazon, I would imagine you could probably get into any industry you don't have a traditional foothold in and probably be a dominant player by throwing around your money and acquiring. Is that what we want? Like, I just, and again, I'm not saying that those things are definitively going to happen, but I think those are concerns that people should think of when they're thinking about these types of cases.
I mean, Lord Durin in chat says, but Disney bought Fox, and yeah, this is actually one of the classic and great case studies that we point to when we talk about this stuff.
Yeah, this is a good one. Yeah.
So Disney did buy Fox, but part of the wheeling and dealing that was going on behind the scenes that led to the approval is that shortly before the acquisition closed, Fox spun off Fox Broadcasting. And one of the bad things is when we bring this up, people often say, oh, well, they just spun off the news network. No. They actually spun off the Fox Broadcasting Company, Fox Television Stations, Fox News Channel, Fox Business, Fox Sports 1 and 2, Fox. I'm not going to say that because I'm not a good Spanish speaker. There's Spanish Fox Channel, and the Big Ten Network. And then also divested of Fox Sports News and Sky. And so Comcast spun things out into new corporations, and then that's what was acquired. Not the Fox as it existed before the acquisition closed, but a smaller piece.
And don't undersell the importance of having to spin out Sky, because spinning out Sky might not seem big in the US. In the UK and New Zealand, Australia, and parts of the EU, that's a huge network and a very influential network.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Falky. That's a great point.
Yeah, it took us a very long time to access Formula One over here in the States.
Yeah, I'm not a. That's cap logic. Nobody watches Formula One.
well, they weren't. Because what was it? I think Sky had an exclusive deal for the broadcast rights.
I think so. Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah, they did. Yeah.
And that's the thing. And deviate there slightly. Everyone complains about the Murdoch press, Sky News, and its huge impact across the world. And we talk about media barons and all that sort of stuff.
Well, the Murdoch press has had some negative consequences to the U.S. and our electoral process, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, but that's that the regulatory bodies required that those, as Hamps listed out, required that to happen so that Disney could get Fox. Now, if Disney did manage to get the whole lot, Disney would have access to the news, one of the most influential news networks on the planet, and what could they do with that power? If you're controlling the a majority of entertainment media and news media, that's a consolidation of power. Again, consolidation comes back.
It's also consolidation of influence too, by the way.
Exactly.
There's tremendous influence in today's media, news media in particular. Yeah. If you don't believe me, look at what Fox News did with the 2020 election, and look at what came out of the lawsuit at Fox News and the emails that came out. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Falky.
No. I was just going to say, we're talking about consolidation of power and influence. Then that is paramount or testimonial to what we're currently discussing with this Microsoft deal. they would have the unilateral power to decide, if they went through unchecked, where one of the biggest games of modern times, but also where some of the most influential IP across multiple different platforms would or could be available. And is that in the benefit of the consumer, or is that in the benefit of the gamer, so to speak, to the broader point, those that currently game and those that would be coming into it? Or is that too much concentration to basically have one person in charge of saying that game can only be on that platform, and take away the options? Is that what we want? Because if that's what the majority want, well, hey, then that's what the majority want. But is that really what they want? Because this is pretty much what they're championing, and they don't realise it because they just see a little victory that they can wave their flag about and go, "Hey, we won, we won." It's like you didn't win anything; you've actually lost yourself something.
Well,
they're too blind to see it.
That Falky's my frustration with some of the coverage by Xbox influencers, those in the Xbox community. That it's not about like stepping back and actually applying some critical thought. Some of these people don't have the ability, I don't think, to apply critical thought. Perhaps because they ate paint chips as children, but or they're wearing barbecue, beer, and freedom T-shirts. Yeah, oh my God. Hey, Logic, I'm actually gonna buy that shirt. By the way, for 4th of July, which is coming up here in the next couple of days. But that's part of the frustration I have with people. Because often the commentary too is, well, look, everyone gets, you've talked about this quite a bit, Game Logic. Often the conversation, well, this is great for consumers to get caught cheap, but I do think, and I wonder, if Microsoft is allowed to make its largest acquisition ever unchecked, and this is why I don't have an issue with the FTC challenging this merger acquisition, but this does embolden Microsoft to potentially go after other publishers, other large publishers. If this deal's passed, and you got to remember, these companies have fiduciary responsibilities to make their shareholders money. One way to do that is through mergers and acquisitions. Who's to say they won't go after EA or Take-Two next? And so that's when I say mass consolidation. Is that the bag that we want to open as consumers? Because anytime, and Logic and Falky, I know you both have talked about this on this show. Anytime you remove suppliers from the market, you have less suppliers is less choice for consumers. That's never a good thing for consumers. And so I only bring that up because I hope people think about these things as they're looking at this, if they're following this merger acquisition, that they think about these things. They think about the potential impact to consumers. And again, we have examples of other industries, and we talked about this earlier in the show. We have examples of other industries where, in healthcare in the U.S., here in the U.S., the ISP providers, I literally have, in terms of broadband internet, I have one choice where I live, and that's unfortunately Xfinity, and it sucks. It sucks. My other option is to get DSL from Verizon. I'm not going to get DSL. My only choice is literally Xfinity. It's terrible. It's terrible.
Well, at least you have a choice.
I have no choice.
Well, you said you can have, broadband from Xfinity, or you can have ADSL from whoever the other mob was.
Well, DSL isn't even broadband, though. It's DSL. Yeah, DSL is like 20-year-old technology. It's not even. I don't even have FiOS. I don't have, like Component says, I love my fiber internet, though. I don't have true fiber. Where I used to live, I had true fiber, where the line with the optical line was actually ran to the house.
Yeah,
we don't have that. We don't have that.
One thing I want to mention is, I personally, I'm I'm less concerned about the scenario of Microsoft going after other publishers, more so than, like we talked about last night, what it incentivizes the rest of the industry to do, which I think is another thing that people skate by is,
that's a great point.
I've talked about, look, once you take Call of Duty and combine it with the cloud strengths of Microsoft and you put Call of Duty in Game Pass and you do other things, right? If I'm EA or Ubisoft or 2K or some of these other Bandai Namco, what do I do, right? What is my competitive status now within the market, and why would I not seek a deal to sell to a large media conglomerate or to sell to one of the other cloud CSPs, Amazon or Google, or why would I not seek maybe to merge with one of the other big third-party publishers, so that we can kind of combine our financial resources? But yeah, the concern is that, that it will be the impetus to more consolidation, which I would argue we're already seeing around the industry.
Well, I think and I gotta be honest here, Hap. I hope, please stop tweeting at me saying, what about Embracer Group? Stop.
Oh, that's weeks worth of podcasts on its own to discuss that thing.
Well,
the scale and the scope just isn't the same. Embracer owns tons of studios, but many, dozens, maybe hundreds of them are small mom and pop shop, 1 and 2 developers, working out of, the person's garage in their home if they own a home. It's really small beans. I mean, the Embracer Group market cap is significantly less than the other big third-party publishers, and they're pretty much just a publishers clearinghouse essentially for a lot of small studios, with exceptions of some of their
Logic. Don't slander Ed McMahon, by the way. Look, let me tell you, as a child, I was dreaming of Ed McMahon showing up to my house to give me a check for $1 million, but that's another conversation.
Right. But with the exception of some of their larger studios like Gearbox and THQ and Saber. Things like that, but it's just again, this is what happens when people look at, what people talk about is, well, Sony made X number of exclusive deals, and I'm like, okay, so the number of exclusive titles that they made isn't what's significant. What's significant is the total dollar value of that output. Right now, if you're going to make an argument based on that stance, you have to go figure that out, and then you have to compare it to the revenue-based output of Bethesda and now Activision, and make the case that they're a commensurate thing, which I would hold that they're clearly definitely not without even doing the math. But you have a super chat also out there, BRAP.
Oh yeah, no, I got the super chat. It's been hanging out there for a little bit. Hold on a sec here. So Lord Jurinza, I'm probably not pronounced that correctly, so I apologize. $5 super chat, thank you, sir. Says, have y'all spoke Microsoft trying to get on the mobile space with Apple, Google, because I believe they are trying to get that market too. Yeah, we talked about this last night too, and I do think that is I think it's interesting. Like the FTC is really focusing on Call of Duty, and they are focusing on other things too. But there's been a lot of conversation around Call of Duty. I think the big play here is getting King and getting into getting access to Candy Crush and. Getting to that mobile space, which, Logic, you and I have talked about this. I think we talked about this on the show Wednesday or yesterday. I say Wednesday, yesterday. That could open up a lot of revenue opportunities for Microsoft,
particularly in advertising.
Yeah, well, yeah, Falky, you talked about that. We talked about what was the fruit game? Oh shit, I forgot.
Fruit Ninja.
Fruit Ninja. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so Falky, expand upon that a little bit because we talked about this last night. I don't think Lord, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to pronounce the name because I'm going to butcher it. Jurinza, I think that's it. Kind of talk about that again. I know we talked about it last night, but if you could talk about it to those who didn't maybe hear you, kind of break down how that could be advantageous for Microsoft.
So. I'm just trying to remember how I pitched it last night.
Laugh.
I was just trying to remember how
they can make a lot of money, Falky, right?
Yeah. So, Fruit Ninja is the example I used, and I'll use it again. So, or Candy Crush, you can apply this to nearly any mobile game. So, mobile games make all their money out of advertising, and using that to either generate advertising revenue, or to force people to pay to remove the advertising, and some advertising still remains anyway. So Fruit Ninja is an example. You get the game for free, and there's banner ads top, sides, bottom. After every level, 1 or 2 ads rolls through, and it ties into the algorithm ties it into your profile for advertising that either Google or Apple, whoever holds it, right? And Microsoft has not yet tapped into that at a consumer and in personal level. Yes, they've got more business profiling than what Apple and Google have because of all their business stuff, but they don't have individual consumer, and they haven't tapped in advertising to individual consumers in any way, shape, or form that's meaningful. But they've been spending money on it, and so was Sony, and so was Nintendo, and every man and his dog's looking at how do we get to leverage passive advertising revenue out of what we offer. So maximum monetization. So if you got a game like Candy Crush or Fruit Ninja or whatnot, and you got the ads all the way around it, to get rid of it, you can pay $1, $2, $2.50, whatever it is. And it gets rid of the banner ads and the ads jumping up in between the levels, but it doesn't get rid of the ads in the load screens or in the main menus and all that sort of stuff. And what it does do is starts to push for the in-game purchases harder. So they basically just pay to be hit with monetization for microtransactions harder. And that's how they leverage advertising into it. Now, you imagine putting that into something like a game like Starfield or whatnot, where you're in your ship doing whatever, and there's banner ads rolling up the side of the screen, or you've got advertising in the game itself at a live point. And you got to apply that across any part of it, if particularly more the streaming side, because it's utilizing the information that's coming through. And that's an opportunity there for Microsoft to really leverage and get into something, because then they'll be able to start collecting your individual data and start to monetize that, which is no different to what Apple and Google are doing. So there's the push into the mobile gaming segment is not necessarily just to get the revenue that's coming out of Candy Crush or King. It's also to get access to all that information, because King has the technology that leverages the algorithms to get that information. And that just opens up an entire new minefield around who actually owns your personal information. Is it your phone company? Is it the maker of the phone, iOS? Is it the person that you've bought the game from? Welcome to the wonderful world of digital minefields. But that's what they're aiming at. They couldn't care less about the console stuff at all, because they can't monetize it any more than they are, and they've cannibalized their supporter base to basically expect to get shit for free.
You know what's funny, Falk? I was just thinking about your commentary about everyone and their dogs trying to figure out ad revenue. That's actually pretty funny, man. No, but you're right though. Like, and there's in logic. We talked about this. There is a lot of power in owning data and selling that data. There's just a lot, right?
I mean, there's a lot more power in that than just the straight revenue that's available from the market, right? From sales of video games.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit, Logic, for the because I know we.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, man.
I think it mostly follows suit with what Falky said, right? It's what does the world look like, and you could see the advantages for Microsoft if you were able to deploy a service on mobile phones, particularly if they also went out in their efforts to push for more openness in terms of the market, in terms of allowing iPhones and Android phones to access storefronts that are not solely the App Store and the Google Play Store. Then you're able to deploy a service, right? Take those King properties, put them in Game Pass, make Game Pass for mobile users a much better value proposition, because it has their casual mobile games that they're interested in, but it also provides them a portal to all these other games that they might be interested in. You then combine that with being able to potentially get around some of the restrictions Apple has put up around the way customer information can be accessed via ad tech, which has caused a hit to Google's business and Meta's business model. But you work towards things like that, and then you get access to as Falky said, right, to the profile, to shopping habits. You get to do things like if the Game Pass app that you access the mobile games through has links that are actually tied into, take you out onto the web or even over to the Microsoft Store, but do so via a backend that's actually Bing, right? Then that's additional data that's collected. That's additional data that, oh, by the way, is going into the learning model for ChatGPT.
Logic, I'm sorry. I need to address something here in the live chat. Remake Station, we don't allow this kind of conversation here in the live chat. If you want to act as a child, there's other podcasts you can do that in. Don't do that here. So long, goodbye. Go ahead, Hamp.
Yep, no, that was all of it. But the point is that having access to that information, and I can't go into all the details on it, but having access to that information, the way that information has value and can be used, is a much more kind of key strategic component for large tech businesses, especially today, than even just the video games themselves. But the point is that. Yes, Microsoft has products on mobile phones. They have Office 365. They have Outlook. They have OneDrive, but you only have certain customers that are using that. Obviously, if you're able to access mobile customers, you can spread that out to billions of additional consumers, which would utilize those Microsoft apps and help increase that access to data.
Yeah, that's a great point. Logic
in the digital age. Mm-hmm. Sorry, in the current global age. Digital age, information is king.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it is more valuable than cash most of the time. Ooh. Information is king. And the reason it is so damn valuable is it is now a tradable commodity, and it allows for premiums to be charged for information. I don't know. Hamp would have heard of this, but I bet you no one else that's listening has heard of this. Have you ever heard of a data cleansing expert?
I have.
You ever heard of that?
I have.
So for those that don't know, a data cleansing expert comes in and goes through these massive warehouses of data to clean it up to make it more presentable and easier to access. But data cleansing experts also go through and chop out all the garbage data that's in there, so that what you're left with is a premium level, so to speak, a high level of quality of information, so you can target those individuals with very specific advertising items and very specific offerings. It's like, imagine the Google algorithm or the Apple algorithm on steroids. And what they're doing is these individuals that are experts in doing this are doing it with AI. So they're training the AIs as they're doing this for a handover point. Within 5 years, the AIs will live in the systems themselves. The Apple, Google, Microsoft, all of those that are collecting data. The AIs will live within those systems, and they will start to interact with you. You won't know if you're talking to a person or if you're talking to an AI. And their whole purpose of doing this is so they can sell you stuff that directly appeals to you. Not, let's put an ad on TV. TV advertising is effectively doomed because it's mass untargeted. It's just, hey, you ever noticed how you get more advertising for fast food when it's closed, the hour leading up to dinner time?
Oh, yeah.
That's the only time that they really do it. You ever notice that in the middle of the day when senior citizens are sitting at home with nothing to do, that they start advertising for life insurance, funeral insurance?
That's so true, yes.
That's what TV advertising is now, is just pick the time of day when the demographic is likely to be watching. But they just load them up after. What they're going to end up with this data cleansing stuff is, for example, with Hamp. Hamp, you've got certain purchasing habits that we know of. You've got certain viewing habits, certain engagement points, and we know the AI now knows how to get you to engage with the AI. And the second that you do, they'll start throwing advertising or start trying to sell stuff to you. And every time a new ad pops up in that 5 or 10 second piece, the company that's doing it's making money. because advertisers are paying a premium to be able to get something in front of you with a high chance of selling it to you. That's where this is going to end up. Because that path is already, and you're saying before, we can't tell the future with a crystal ball. We can't tell the future with a crystal ball, but we can see what direction the road is heading, and we can see the town that's in front of us.
Hey.
That's where this is going to end up.
Falky, so my question to you is, when does Skynet become self-aware?
Probably already has. We just don't know it yet.
Because that's I look. I am not a tinfoil conspiracy theorist, but when I hear AI and AI embedded, and I'm seeing it on my own job now, where AI is doing things. Oh, I mean, some of the stuff AI is doing for my job is just like, I'm like, wow. Like it's actually able to have conversations with external clients, and the external clients don't know they're having conversation with AI. That I'm like, okay. And again, I'm not. I don't consider myself a tinfoil conspiracy theorist, but Jesus, I mean, I think of the movie Terminator. I think of other video games that we play. I mean, like, I'm a little concerned. I'm just a little concerned.
Yeah.
but I think, Falky, I'm sorry, but I think this is, and so when I think of big picture and I think about what regulatory bodies are trying to do, you have to imagine that they also see what we're seeing, right? That these big tech companies have a lot of influence. They own a lot of. You talked about data being the being king in terms of currency over cash, right?
Yeah.
These big tech companies have that.
Yeah, they do. Oh, look, this is how crazy it is. In Australia, and it'll be the same in nearly every OECD country. In Australia, Apple and Google have flexible rules, if you want to even call them rules, around what they can and can't harvest in terms of your information, right? They're allowed to have levels of information that are powers, like, and I mean like to the power of 10, 12, 15 times more than what the government's allowed to have. And if the government wanted to do something and needed to get access to that information to prevent a serious crime or a serious issue from happening, they have to go through the court system to ask Apple or Google to release the information. And the legislation basically says Apple and Google can still say no and hold it up. So if there was a mass catastrophic event that was being planned, and the intelligence agencies went, right, we know something's going to happen in Melbourne, and we know it's going to be big. It's going to potentially, be a huge life loss situation. We know that the information is that Apple's got the communications that have occurred. Government can't get them. So not only do these tech companies have the ability to harvest it and store it and own it, that's the other thing too. It's not yours, it's theirs. Because they've gone through the effort of collecting it, they own it. They're not obliged to give it to anyone. They can sell it, but they're not obliged to provide it. So they actually have unilateral power across multiple countries in the world to hold all this information and do what they see fit with it unchecked.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you, that I'm not a tinfoil conspiracy theorist, Falky, but that.
Something. Now, look, that's my perspective from a business input, because the AI is really shaking up things that we're looking at it going, well, do we actually need these people to do this job? If we don't need them to do that, what else can we have them doing, or do we just not need them at all? But AI is not perfect, so we still need someone to administrate it and run it, and then we have the back end making sure that the service is working for what we're getting. We've got to employ someone to maintain it. It's got evolutions and all that costs associated with it. It's actually, in some instances, for some of the more simpler stuff, cheaper to just have someone doing it the old-fashioned way than it is to have an AI doing it, because of how much cost there is at the moment. So it's checks and balances. There's an interesting quote that you said with the Skynet thing that I like to refresh my memory of sometimes. It's not when the AI is winning, when artificial intelligence is winning the chess match, we don't need to worry. It's when it loses on purpose and we don't know. That's when we're in trouble.
Oh man, that's scary. That means they're testing us.
Exactly.
All right.
So,
You know
sorry.
what? I'd actually like to have a conversation podcast about AI. And Logic, I've been meaning to ask you about AI for a long time, man. It's another conversation. I'm sorry, Faki. Go ahead, man.
No, you're right. I'm all done.
Real quick update regarding the because today's the last day of the injunction hearing. According to some of the well, let me get this super chat here because this is why I brought this up. Zero Pi with the $2 ship says Tim Dog said the FTC lawyer was crying. Damn. You paid $2 to say that. Thank you. So the Xbox community is celebrating because apparently the judge cuts off the FTC and says it's not the harm to Sony we care about, but the harm to consumers. This is and this goes kind of go back to kind of what my kind of what I said earlier about the coverage or the conversation around this, like this treating it like it's a WWE, like it's WrestleMania. You know, yeah. Actually, I think with the if I'm reading this correctly, the judge actually said the FTC, the merger. Hold on a second, I'm trying to pull this up now. All right, the FTC says, what's the, because I'm going to provide some additional context here. This person left this out. They just wanted to pom-pom and celebrate like Hulk Hogan just slammed onto the giant. Once they decide to merge, they come together. We heard about the harms, for example, to Sony in terms of optimization. And then the judge says, we're concerned about the harm to consumers. But what people don't realize, and I've said this before, the harm to competition has a trickle-down effect in terms of the harm to competition to companies in particular has a trickle-down effect to potentially harm consumers as well. So,
I think there's something else we need to make sure we clarify, and I think people have been getting it way twisted for a very long time. I think when we come on here and we have these discussions, there's some sense that we're taking the FTC's side, that we're trying to prove the CMA's case. So at least from my perspective, it's like I say about software. I don't buy days on day one or do early access because I get paid to test software, to be software QA. I'm not doing that work for free. We're not on here having these conversations to prove the FTC's case or the CMA's case. That's their job. They hire people for that. They have contracts for that. They have independent consultants for that. At the end of the day, I don't know that I really care about what the FTC argues. I've pointed out several times where there are vectors of argument that I would take that the FTC hasn't. So it's not a matter of taking the FTC side, or quite frankly, if the FTC wins or loses, they'll win or lose the case based on their argument for the case. That really doesn't matter to me. At the end of the day, what we're expressing, what I'm expressing is my own opinion based largely on economics, software engineering, P&L at these large companies, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, it's not like if the FTC loses, that means that, we're wrong. That just means that the judge wasn't convinced to see it the way that we do. Just the same way as if I vote for the person who doesn't win an election, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm wrong. That just means that other people had a different opinion. So, too often in these conversations, particularly in the gaming community, we squelch down on these binaries. Somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose. There has to be a right and there has to be a wrong, and that's where people do get it wrong, because people make claims as if they are the entirety of the gaming consumer market, and they're not. They're one piece of it. So, I just want to kind of clarify that out and put that out.
Yeah, and I wanted to add some additional context because there was some context missing from that tweet, which is why I brought it up. But I also wanted to kind of reinforce the idea too that protecting competitors too it has a trickle down effect to protecting consumers, and there's and look, at the end of the day, like if the FTC, if the injunction doesn't go through, it just doesn't go through, and that's it.
there's further
yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, there's further context to go with that though. Like, we're not sitting in the room, and most of the people that are reporting on this shit aren't sitting in the room. It's one thing to be viewing it.
Well, people are listening to it at live right now,
Yeah,
so people are like listening to
there's
Zoom call. But there's also some people are also looking for those Jerry Springer moments, or those moments where like, oh yeah, you hear that? They're looking for that sensationalist moment. I mean, we don't know. I mean, like, look, I mean, ultimately the judge is gonna make a decision, and whatever decision they make, they make, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, I do agree with the logic though. I really don't care who wins or loses. I don't look at it like who wins or loses. You know, and I think the perspective that we're providing is contrary, is a different perspective from, you know, some of the console warring that's going out there where people are arriving to definitive conclusions. You know,
influencers that are supposedly experts in different matters where they've never done it, or journalists that just hear something and think that the best way to get clicks is to report it that way. What I was trying to infer was, we're not in the room, we're not getting paid for any of our professional perspectives on this thing. I couldn't give two rats' asses either way, which way it goes. I can see that the argument for, I can see the argument against. I know which would be the better outcome for the medium long term and the whole industry, and that would be for it to not occur. But there's also benefits and repercussions of if it would occur for certain parts of the gaming segment. Now, but there's a lot of commentary that happens around, the judge said this, the judge did that, the judge said that. Look, it's one thing to watch the Zoom, it's one thing to watch it through a lens. Three of us know on a Teams call or a Zoom call or a Skype call or whatever, you do not get the feeling of what the vibe is in the room. And you can quite easily misread how somebody's body language is happening and get it very, very wrong just because you see it on the screen and you're not standing next to them. And I guarantee you that Zoom call is not showing all the stuff that's happening off camera that may or may not be influencing what the judge is going to say. Now, the judge has got options here. They can say yes, they can say no. If they say yes, then it means this. If they say no, then it means that. The get out of jail card here is that the judge goes down the pathway that basically just says, all right, well, I'm going to say this, and it allows the other case to continue, and then it's off my hands. It's whatever it is, and it becomes whatever it is. But yeah, for everybody that's saying, oh, it's over, it's done, it's happening and whatnot, and predicting what the judge is going to say before the closing arguments have completed, you are just as likely to look like a hero as you are to look like a complete idiot.
Yeah, it's 50-50-90, which unfortunately seems to be a colloquialism that has also been eroded from our culture over time.
What's that, Hamp?
50-50-90.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
When your chances are 50-50, you are likely to get it wrong 90% of the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the CMA is an example of that. I mean, and then it's interesting. Like to your point, Falky. I mean, we don't know. We don't know the temperature of the room. But depending on who you're reading and because one thing I'll say this, depending on who you're following, there's different interpretations of what's being said in that courtroom right now, and that's why I'm kind of like, you know what, guys, let's not jump to these conclusions. Let the process play out. I've always said that. Let the process play out, and whatever the judge ultimately decides to do in this case, they'll decide to do, and that's it.
Yep.
Well, and here's the thing. Capono says, it sounds like a catch-22, Hamp, and yeah, Capono, you're right. I mean, the problem here is, and this is the thing that to me is kind of revealed in the discussion. So people who are running around making the statements like the the judge is cooking the FTC, Microsoft, blah blah blah. I mean, those are the people that it should be readily seized upon that they are not unbiased, that they are clearly rooting for a side, that they are clearly aligned with the brand. And so all the gaslighting that comes on, when you express an opinion that is not supportive of their preferred platform, and they leap to the defense and try and claim that you're the person who's biased, obviously is absolutely untrue. I'm not over here cheerleading and pom-pomming for every little teeny tiny statement that comes out from one side or the other. I mean, those are people who are involved and engaged and emotionally invested to derive something else out of this.
And the more important, I shouldn't say the more important, equally important to go along with what you're just saying there, Ham, and I completely agree with that, 1,000,000%, is it's not necessarily what's been presented. It's has what's been presented addressed the question or the purpose of having this hearing? Because we've seen umpteen examples of very, very poor business practices from both sides, or say both sides, from Sony and Microsoft. But we've seen evidence of Microsoft flirting or progressing down the pathway of foreclosure strategy in a much harsher way than what PlayStation is, and yet these same people who claim to be unbiased, but they're not, are sitting back saying, oh, Microsoft's got this beaten because PlayStation's got nothing on them. The point that I'll just hark back to that was picked up and has been thrown around ad nauseum in the last 2 weeks is that, they got Bethesda and they made it all exclusive. And then you've got, Bethesda doesn't understand why that's happening to them, but they can't put anything on PlayStation. But then it's ABK is a different case, because ABK is a very different basket of eggs than what Bethesda was. And of course, they're totally separate and totally different points of size and scope and influence within the gaming market. You can't say one's the same as the other, and to do so is quite asinine. But when they talk about the exclusivity part of that, well, PlayStation goes, and Bethesda is the example, PlayStation gets Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo as a timed exclusive. Great. And part of that timed exclusivity is we get that clause that comes through that says, we get right of first refusal when you go to put it on a subscription service. Excellent. Happy days. Standard business practice. Microsoft finds out about Starfield potentially going down that route, and instead of coming up with a counter offer that says, hey, look, we know you're considering this, we really want to make sure we get our piece of the pie here, can we work something out? Instead of saying that, they went, oh shit, hit the emergency release button, we'll just buy the whole thing out from under them and make sure Sony doesn't get it. That's a foreclosure strategy. That's anti-competitive behavior. That's an antitrust behavior. But let's not talk about the fact that, these, and this is paraphrasing it, that piece has come out, and on the same side of that, or the same part of that coin, you've got Xbox signs up deals for games to come to Game Pass for long periods of time of exclusivity, and it's written out as you must only be on us, not a right of first refusal. It's, if you make the game for us, you are doing this. Well, if you don't want to do this, then you don't get to have the game on our platform. And again, there's nuances and there's differences in how they're approaching it, and I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong, but one is clearly shown a disdain for the nicer way of doing business in an attempt to just go, we're just going to yank the toys out of our opposition's hand, and we're just purposefully going to do this. They say the email in 2019 is a thought process that doesn't reflect our actions. Well, look at every action they've taken since then. It certainly lines up, and then they front up to court and say, no, this isn't, and people are going, look, Microsoft has beaten the FTC in this. Well, have they actually? Because the question was for a preliminary injunction to be able to close the deal. Now, the FTC had issues around competition and consumer points, but has Microsoft inadvertently been shown to be working in an antitrust and anti-competitive behavior with some of the things that they have done? I don't think people really understand the scope that's available to the judge here. So if you're going to make these conclusions before the closing arguments are finished and before the judge has had time to consider, you are very, very much going to look like a fool.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. Again, I go back to, depending on what you read or who's writing it, you would think that the FTC is winning, the FTC is losing. And so I take a lot of this with a grain of salt. Like I'm reading Derek Strickland, who's been covering this from Tweakdown, who tweeted the 10-year deals with Nintendo and Nvidia do not seem strong. Apparently, Nintendo is confused as some of the provisions And he says, I'm surprised they signed if that's the case. NVIDIA still has concerns, even with Windows operating system price drops sweetening the deal. Derek also says the FTC only has to prove that there are still substantial questions. He says that I think Dr. Lee's model stuck, and that's the professor that everyone said dropped the ball. And I think Derek even wrote an article, which is kind of ironic that he may have missed the mark with with his commentary of ABK, but he says that I think on emphasis on think, Dr. Lee model stuck and relevant console market may have stuck as well, though it's a tough call to make. Corley seemed receptive to some of Weingarten's arguments, but challenged switching effect repeatedly. Again, again, depending on who you're seeing a variety of different interpretations here, and that's why it causes people to just jump to conclusions and say this is a done deal. Again, let the process play out. At the end of the day, the judge will make a decision on this injunction, and that's it.
It's not that I usually address frequently to the chat. There's an individual in the chat, Jujutsu50, has made 2 comments, and I just want to point them out. One of them says, that's not what the judge thinks. You've got no fucking clue what the judge thinks, unless you are the judge. So, 1, don't make assumptions like that. And the second one is, if this gets rejected, Microsoft will buy many studios. If this gets rejected, there's no guarantee that that money is available for Microsoft to pursue it, because there's other projects in the pipeline. Again, people don't understand how big businesses work. You have a project and it's got a commitment of funding, right? And if that falls through, you don't automatically get that money to go and do something else. There are projects that are lined up years in advance that get done. And as soon as one falls over, the money gets redistributed and you're at the back of the line. There'd quite easily be no money available for buying studios if this thing falls through for the next 2 years for them. And they'll have to fight tooth and nail to get something to happen. They're not going to get $70 billion to go and do this. The flip side to that, if it does get through and they do spend the money, and it harks back to Phil being an idiot because he doesn't know how to explain stuff. Remember when he was on the stand and he said, we're not purchasing something, we're just converting one asset into another asset? I'll put it to you this way. Phil, is there money leaving the bank account or not? Because if money leaves the bank account, that's a purchase. Don't try and be smart with accounting terminology with lawyers, because you only look like a fucking idiot.
Yeah. The other thing, Jiu-Jitsu, I know you said you do know. You actually really don't know. That's your interpretation that she's fed up with the FTC lawyers. None of us know.
Amber Heard was winning all the way up until the judgment point.
I mean, there was well, it's funny you mentioned that case because that case happened in my backyard, but again, there was people that were like, "Oh, Johnny Depp won, Amber Heard won." I mean, it was kind of back and forth. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Let the process play out, but to come to these conclusions, again, Jiu-Jitsu, unless I would say this, if she specifically said I'm fed up, then I would probably agree with you. She verbally communicated that. But I'm reading some of the coverage by different influencers and different media types that are covering this right now in real time, and I'm not getting that vibe. I mean, sure, you could feel that way, but none of us know for 100% sure. If you know 100% sure,
I think he finally understood the laws of physics and space and time and walked it back, saying that he obviously doesn't know, but it has been the same for 4 days straight. So he's converted to the I definitely know beyond a shadow of a doubt to that's what I believe and perceive based on what I've heard.
Yeah, well, Jiu-Jitsu, tell you what, since you clearly know for 100%, I need you to pick the Powerball numbers and the Mega Millions numbers for me. Please do that. Send me a DM.
For Australia, too.
Yeah, so I can win the lottery. Yeah, okay, I'm getting the vibe. Okay, Jiu-Jitsu, a vibe is not... Are you fucking... Excuse my language. Are you kidding me? A vibe is not conclusive. Like, what do you... A vibe... Like, tell you what, Jiu-Jitsu, I have a bridge to sell you, by the way. A vibe...
Got a goose that lays golden eggs.
A vibe is a guess. All feelings, man. This is the problem that I have. Like, look, you can have your opinions. That's fine.
Vibe through a screen.
No, the same vibe you were just saying. No, what I'm saying is we don't definitively know anything. And why don't we definitively know anything? Because no final judgment has been rendered yet. This isn't rocket science. Jiu-Jitsu
hey guys,
50.
Hey, we should all have a round of applause. We have Cisco Ramon in the chat. He's the vibe. He's got it on lock. People who are CW fans of the Arrowverse will get that pop culture reference.
That's actually pretty funny.
Absolutely.
Not feeling
Cisco.
Good vibe. I gotta be honest with you, Jiu-Jitsu. You have lost me, sir. Look, again, this isn't. Oh my God, man! This is part of the problem. People are taking emotion and applying it to this case. It's like, no, let the process play out. The FTC will make their arguments. Microsoft's attorneys will make their arguments. A judge will decide whether or not they want to move forward with the FTC's injunction to block Microsoft and Activision Blizzard from merging prior to the August 2nd hearing with the FTC's administrative law judge.
Yep.
That's it. That's all we're talking about. And what we're talking about on the show is giving you a different... Okay, here we go. Jiu-Jitsu 50, no emotion here. I don't trust our government. Jiu-Jitsu, that is emotion. You're projecting emotion on the government. What? Let me guess. I could probably build your profile. You're probably a conspiracy theorist. Right? Would I be off base, Jiu-Jitsu, saying that you might be leaning very right? Maybe a little Proud Boys-ish? All right, let me stop.
Yes. A question from Mr. Tennis. Interesting name. Analysis so far, what do you think will happen? Well, who knows? It's down to an individual to assess what information has been presented to them, what evidence has been presented to them, and to basically see which one for the plaintiff or the defendant for the injunction is more successful, based on whatever question is they're trying to ask or trying to get answered. And there's nuance and intricacies that need to be addressed as part of that. Now, look, the judge could come out and say yes, no, or indifferent. The judge can give a decision both ways effectively and say yes to this part and no to that part, and then they're basically stuck at square one.
The same judge actually did something similar with the gamer lawsuit over this merger acquisition.
Yeah, so I defer to Hamp. He's probably got more of a technical background on this stuff than I do. Again, I'm not in country US. I'm not privy to how the intricacies of the legal systems happen to a large degree. I'm more around the understanding of the contracting law side of things and how that works from the business perspective in the US as well. But anyway, if the judge comes out and says, "Hey, look, yes to this, no to this. Here's some key thought points," they get committed to the findings as talking points, and that could have massive ramifications either way. Particularly if the judge says, on this particular instance, we find that, yes, it satisfies this, but it doesn't satisfy that. But hey, there's been some pretty shady practices going on at Microsoft or at Sony or whoever it is. I'm going to suggest a referral to a regulatory body for an investigation. That's a genuine outcome that could happen. And that just opens up another can of worms of crap for them to deal with. So...
Yeah. I mean, fuck it. There is a variety of outcomes that could come out. Like the judge could say, you know what, the FTC, I don't feel like this harms consumers, or the judge could say, you know what, I have some concerns based on Microsoft's foreclosure strategy with ZeniMax, or Microsoft's ability to leverage its adjacencies and have a competitive advantage, or they may say, hey, you know what, Microsoft, yeah, you know what, may need to look at spinning off certain assets. I mean, there's a variety. We don't know what the judge is thinking. The judge is doing their due diligence and asking tough questions and trying to understand the arguments from both sides. It's
Oh, look, again, it comes back to consumers' perspective. Well, that's, is it beneficial for the consumer to be able to access something cheaper? Yes, in the short term, but not necessarily in the long term if it means a degradation in quality, a degradation in service, without a reduction in price. Or it means if there's a price increase without an increase in the quality of the service, well, that's harmful to consumer as well. So you need to think about this crap before people open their mouths and say it's cheaper, so it's better. No, it's not. It's not, even by a long shot.
There's that old, there's that old adage, oh, fuck, you get what you pay for, too. I mean, that's...
Exactly. Exactly. And then you need to also consider consumer habits and consumer desires, as people may or may not want to engage with this content in other platforms if it's restricted to that point, because it means that they would be detached from either their cohort or their group of people that they play games with.
I'm sorry. I want to chime in real quick. Jiu-Jitsu 50 says straight to Game Pass doesn't mean low budget. I mean, my opinion.
Yet to be seen otherwise. Show me some evidence of high budget games working in Game Pass.
I was just about to say that based on their current release cadence and what we've seen from games, first party games that release in Game Pass, I'm not sure that's necessarily true. I could be wrong. Perhaps they release a big AAA game that takes advantage of the Xbox Series X's hardware and they won Publisher of the Year 2021 and PlayStation won it the following year. Okay? So what?
So what? They won Publisher of the Year because they had... They won Publisher of the Year because they had a higher volume of higher rating games on an average, right? More than half of them were PC games, and the other ones that rated high were small indie-style games like Pentiment or whatever it was.
This is the issue, I think, with Jiu-Jitsu 50, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to pick you. You sound like someone who listens to a lot of Xbox-centric podcasts. You seem to be rattling off a lot of the same talking points that I hear. But no one's saying that they haven't put out games that are good. What we're talking about quality, we're talking about, and we're talking about games that, and I think Logic explained this earlier, about games that, may, because of the potential cost to Game Pass, may not get the massaging that they need to be really good games in terms of how they perform. And I think Redfall may be an example of that. I hope I'm not misquoting you, Game Logic. I think that's kind of what you're alluding to in terms of development.
Well, because I actually prepared this exercise in my back pocket as well.
Yeah.
So Jiu-Jitsu.
So Logic, you pull your receipts out your pocket then, right?
Well, no, it's just a scenario that I think it's good to talk through. So Jiu-Jitsu, I'm glad you're here. So let's clear the table and let's start. The deal gets approved. It's the first year that Microsoft owns the Call of Duty franchise. Call of Duty goes into Game Pass. How does Call of Duty, or does Call of Duty, make the same amount of money that it normally does? Yeah, so that's a question. So you're claiming that it does make the same amount of money that year that it goes into Game Pass?
Well, I want to just, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt Logic, but Bobby Kotick talked about Game Pass. He said Bobby Kotick, and it's funny, when Jim Ryan came out and said publishers don't like Game Pass, people were like, what are you talking about? Publishers do like Game Pass, and they started tweeting out small indie publishers that were pro Game Pass, which for obvious reasons they might be pro Game Pass. But like Strauss Zelnick, which we've talked about a lot on the show, please read what Strauss Zelnick, who's the CEO of Take-Two, or 2K, see what he has said about multi-game subscription services like Game Pass. Bobby Kotick, under oath, said, despite he thinks that Game Pass hurts businesses.
Yep. So Jiu-Jitsu says it doesn't. They want subscriptions to go up. Says they will never sell the same with subscription services on the Xbox side. Okay, so Call of Duty, owned by Microsoft, goes into Game Pass. The total number of sales that are made is less than the norm. You are therefore accruing less revenue for the Call of Duty franchise. So less money is coming in. At the same time, Call of Duty is going to 2 additional platforms. So we now have more deployment targets. The property is going to more locations. There's less money coming in. What is the impact of that to the business?
And real quick logic, Kotick also mentioned that when he's talking about like things like subscription services, he said they don't make commercial sense and hurt business. He actually mentioned his proximity to Hollywood and the negative impact the subscription services have had to Hollywood. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So Jiu-Jitsu responds, yes, I agree. No more revenues. And I think what you're saying is, no longer equivalent revenue, but the subscriptions go up. So my point is, nobody's acting dumb, Jiu-Jitsu. I'm asking you questions that you can answer. So less money is coming in. Call of Duty is more widely distributed. It's being sold its access to it is being sold at a lesser price. So subscriptions have gone up. So I think what you're saying is more people are accessing it, but less money is being made. The other publishers and developers who would sell competitive products against Call of Duty, do they continue making investments in their portfolio to compete against Call of Duty?
He also says they want to be the Netflix of gaming. Jiu-Jitsu, I mean, like, does Netflix have, like, blockbuster movies in their subscription service? I mean, look at the production values and their exclusive and their content compared to stuff that's coming out of Warner Brothers.
No, don't let him worm, because I think he's trying to worm to go after simple questions. I'm asking you direct questions, Jiu-Jitsu. We're waiting for you to answer. So what I've said is the product is being more widely distributed, less money is coming in, access to it is cheaper. Do the other competitors in the market, do EA, Ubisoft, who's working on X Defiant, do other competitors in the market continue to invest money in their portfolio to make products that are directly competitive against Call of Duty?
Jiu-Jitsu, what blockbuster games, AAA games is, when I say blockbuster, and when I say blockbuster games, and I talk about like Warner Brothers, I'm talking about these big budget experiences. What does Xbox have that's big budget AAA right now?
Yeah, so Jiu-Jitsu says short term they will make less, long term they will get more subscriptions. You're not answering my question, Jiu-Jitsu. You claimed that it's good for consumers, good for all consumers. I'm walking you through a scenario, asking you to answer a question. Don't answer the simple stuff. This is me. I'm taking my 2 fingers and pointing at my eyeball. Stop getting distracted and answer my questions. Yeah, and NATO's at this point. Stop dodging questions.
Did he really just answer with Fable and Starfield?
He did. I might give him Starfield based on what I've seen. That might be the first one. But Fable, we don't know. We haven't seen it. Fable's not even out. I'm just gonna. We'll just wait for him to answer. I feel like I need the Jeopardy music right now.
Yeah, I get it, Jiu-Jitsu. Listen, dude, I've literally asked my question like 3 minutes ago, and you've written 3. I won't be insulting. You've written 3 responses that don't address the question. The question is now that Call of Duty is more widely distributed, being sold at a cheaper price to access it, is on multiple platforms, what incentive do EA, Ubisoft, who's making X Defiant as a for instance, other businesses, indies, how are they incentivized, or why would they be incentivized to continue investing in making a competitor to Call of Duty?
And while he's thinking about that, he said Hellblade 2 is not big. Wow, really? I mean, I played the first Hellblade. I mean, it's a good game. It's a great game, but it's not a big AAA blockbuster title. We haven't even seen anything from Hellblade 2 other than a couple cutscenes. Like, this is where I get a little frustrated with some of the folks that come in here that clearly listen to more Xbox centric podcasts. Like, you come in here and you guys start regurgitating talking points because maybe you can't think for yourself. I don't know, but it just.
I don't know. So he answered. I'm assuming this is an answer to the question. He's saying they may not be. So I think what he's saying is they may not be incentivized to continue investing in trying to compete against Call of Duty. That is my whole point. Now I'll just finish the scenario for you. So EA stops pumping money into Battlefield. Ubisoft stops pumping money into XDefiant. Other companies just aren't even interested in trying to cross the barrier to entry. You therefore have fewer suppliers offering that specific product. You therefore have less choice. And eventually you're going to get to a point where you have higher prices. All of those are negative for consumers. Those are economic laws. They cannot be argued. They are taught throughout the education system for anybody who takes basic economics. So your whole scenario that it's good for consumers, by which I think you meant it's good for all consumers, is false. It's incorrect.
If there, real quick, Logic, if there's no competition, what's the incentive for Microsoft to invest a lot of money to make it a quality product?
Correct. I mean, that is another concern.
We see this in other industries happen. This isn't out of the realm of possibility. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Logic.
And so yes, what would change if Microsoft didn't own them? And let me first start with I don't know. So I'm not sure if you're asking that question. What would happen if somebody else owned them? As I've stated on the show a 1,000 times, I don't think anybody should own Activision right now. I damn sure don't think Sony should own them. I think I think it's highly likely that Activision would be seeking sale to either a large media conglomerate if they weren't able to sell to another gaming company, to a platform owner. I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing. Or they would look to merge with one of the other large third-party publishers, which might not be a good thing, but maybe given the various evils that are, potential outcomes of this, maybe that's the best step. I don't know. But if you're asking what happens if things stay the status quo, then I think we have the same market forces that we have right now, which is, third-party publishers and everybody is going to continue trying to find ways to monetize. They're going to look at things like ad-supported tiers. They're going to look at things like, I hate to bring up the term, but they're going to look at things like NFTs, or what will most likely happen, NFTs by another name, which means kind of the things that are happening now, which is what my concern about is always about maybe gamers not always doing all the research and not really finding out all the information and I'm just saying, it's kind of talking out of their ass about things they don't understand. They're going to get duped into going down the path of supporting NFTs because the name has been changed and you've been bamboozled into believing something, in a smoke and mirrors trick. Because you didn't really do the research, you didn't really understand the dynamic.
Yeah, just at 50, he keeps saying and this is a talking point amongst the Xbox community. Well, if Microsoft owned them, it would be cheaper. In the short term, yeah, go ahead, Logic.
Yeah, I know that, Jiu-Jitsu, but look, I'm not going to go back over the lesson, right? I just walked you through the scenario where I said, for some people in the short term, yes, it's going to be good. For the myopic view for, hey, Jiu-Jitsu, you're going to be able to get access to Call of Duty for $15 this fall. In the short term, in the limited view for people who are only thinking 5 feet in front of their face, it's going to be good. But my whole point of walking you through that scenario is to give you considerations of how this could turn bad otherwise.
I mean, was this the promise? Wait, Logic, was this the promise of ISP providers when they merged?
Well, right, and this is my whole point, and this was earlier in the show, right? You really need to look at the historical context of how these things have played out in the past. They have not turned out to be a universal good for consumers. Somehow
cheap mobile prices,
right?
Remember, that's what T-Mobile promised. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, overall, if you look at the trend across the cell phone industry, what we've found is that at a very small percentage, cell phone plan prices have come down. However, for the service. However, what have the cell phone companies done? They've moved the peanut under the shell. They've altered how you pay for your cell phone, and that's where their increased prices come from overall. Cell phone companies are not less profitable today than they used to be, right? They're still making money somehow, and they've still been increasing profits, in revenue. So the problem is that these things need to be looked at long term and not just in these immediate myopic views.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you 110%. And that goes back to like when you talk about like being around like C-suite executives, right? They often look at things long term, kind of the downstream impact. And I wish consumers would look at that a little bit too, because he's not looking at the downstream impact to even like the Game Pass subscription. Game Pass just went up, or it's going up. And that's pre-Activision, pre-ABK being part of Microsoft. I mean, at some point you're going to be paying more money.
Well, not only that, but like I've talked about before, right? The biggest concern is you start to kind of game theory and think about, and we're already seeing this, right? How are other developers viewing the Xbox as a platform? Well, the competitive problem that developers have, that publishers have, is they're now in the mode where part of their decision-making criteria about what platforms they're going to go to, where are they going to make their investment, is the fact that the strongest developer in the Xbox portfolio, the strongest development studio, is the studio named Game Pass. Right?
Oh, man. Game Pass? What? Hold on. Whoa. You lost me there, Hamp. Game Pass? What do you mean?
Every time,
I think I know where you're going. Okay.
Right? So every developer and every publisher has to say, hey, look, here's my game. This is how much money I expect to make on it. Or this is how much I'm going to charge for it.
I'm sorry, Logic. I don't mean to interrupt. I apologize. This is the issue right here. The emotion. This I like Jiu-Jitsu 50, man. Look, it's cool. You go to the dojo, but he just said, and this is, and I don't mean to pick on you, but this is the lack of emotional maturity that drives me batshit crazy when I hear people talk about the gaming industry and talk about this deal. I look at Sony as bullies. I beat those types of guys in my dojo. Are you kidding me?
So,
go ahead.
So his comments. Sorry. His comments are to basically he's jumping ship from the conversation that we tried to engage with him, and everything that Hamp has said so far is in line with what the judge is going to be looking at. This is the stuff that they are, the regulators and the authorities and the judges are having to decide on, not a question of from one gamer to another, one consumer to another, on their personal feelings and individual thoughts. The stuff that the question that Hamp posed is actually quite a very simple one that most middle level management should be able to address in any kind of response, let alone it being something as complex as what the judge is going to have to do. Yet individuals as such can't fathom it, won't fathom it, don't understand it, don't like having their opinions challenged, and then decide to jump ship from the conversation as soon as they get pointed out that they don't understand what they're talking about. I think it should just move on, because he's clearly not interested in learning something, and I don't think we should waste our breath to try and educate him.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Falky.
Now, while we're on the subject of hypotheticals, though, and as Hamp said, this is a potential scenario, a different scenario that can play out, which I'd like to bring up, if I can, very quickly, because I'd like to get Hamp's thoughts on this as it stands. The judge says yes, injunction gets agreed to, or the injunction clears. Microsoft ABK settles. What's the first thing, or one of the first things that Sony could do in response? If this is a precedent that has been set, my thoughts, and from perception from what I see available, is that Sony could quite easily go after Warner Brothers and have a precedent that allows them to go and get them. And Warner Brothers or Skydance or Cyber Agent or someone like that, they could quite easily go, you know what, we're just going to go and pay 30, 40, 50 billion dollars for these guys, and we're going to take control of all of this IP and all of this material and all of this stuff, and we're just going to say only on PlayStation, because the Microsoft argued the case and got it through that was the method that they want to take. That is a very real option as an outcome to this. Now, is that consumer beneficial? Does that meet the requirements of what gamers want? Not particularly, but it is a genuine consideration that people just aren't asking. I use it as an example, but what's the response if this thing goes through? Because Sony isn't exactly broke, and they aren't exactly going to sit back and take it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a little bit of what we've spoken to, right? I mean, the reality is probably the most concerning aspect of this is kind of what you're alluding to, Falky, is the incentive for mutually assured destruction, right? That if Microsoft gets this deal through and essentially goes thermonuclear on the gaming industry, then what does everyone else do? And really, my concern isn't even just what do other people do to kind of be petty or angry. It's more about what are people forced to do. Again, if I'm a business and I see like a big consolidation like this, I start asking the questions. Well, I'm certainly not going to maintain the status quo and stand still. That doesn't make any sense.
No, why would you? Like, if this deal goes through and I'm EA, and I said this last night, I'm shopping around. I mean, and you got to imagine the EA shareholders are saying, hey, wait a minute, guys. EA CEO, Activision just got a freaking bag. What are we doing? And so
Yeah.
and then we go down this path of mass consolidation, which again is not, go ahead, Logic.
Well, and I mean, and we hyper focus on isolating this to the gaming industry, right? And I'm not talking about us.
I'm sorry, Logic. I need it. Just a 50. Like, here's the thing that's kind of frustrating is that we're not having this like playground conversation here, and you're trying to have that here. Like, I think I've seen you in the chat before. This is not that kind of show. We're not here acting like we're watching John Cena versus The Rock, and you're treating it like that. Like, like you're saying, like they have to these days after Sony acting like bullies. I mean, like this idea of poor Microsoft that treating another company can't compete. They chose not to compete. That's on them.
Yeah, I think jujitsu is somebody under the age of 25 whose frontal lobe hasn't fully developed.
Oh man. I mean, like, but seriously, like, this isn't a show, by the way. It's like, if you're going to come in here and you're going to try to, like, be funny and, like, act like a child and jiu-jitsu, you must be new to gaming. I was, by the way, for those who don't know, I don't know if you know this, Falky, but I was an Xbox Live beta tester 20-something years ago.
Really? Are you serious?
Yeah, imagine that. I was. Xbox started competing 20 years ago. Xbox was actually very aggressive in locking down exclusive content to the original Xbox platform. You're 55? Oh, shit. I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh. Oh, my God. Look, I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh. I really don't. I'm sorry.
I mean, at that age, jiu-jitsu, I'm just going to say to you the thing that I normally try and say. You're just having a fundamentally different conversation about the gaming industry than we are, and this probably just isn't like the place for you. I mean,
yeah, I appreciate you like coming here to like engage with us, but I think you want to have a different conversation than we're having, and there's plenty of other podcasts you can go to have that. Again, there's a reason why I have Falky here, because of his expertise in finance. There's a reason why I have Game Logic on here, because of his expertise in software development, engineer, managing P&L. I'm here because I'm the life of the party. I like to think I am. We try to have a more informed conversation here. We don't. The one thing about, if you've been following the show, we don't pom-pom one platform. All of us are multi-platform owners. I think you are too, Falky. I don't know if I've confirmed that with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't care where it is, as long as it's a good game.
Yeah. Do you own a gaming PC, Falky?
No. I have a son who has a gaming PC. And
okay. At least your son. Okay, so that's okay. There we go. And by the way, PC is the best platform to play video games. I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, I mean, like, if we're not that kind of show. We're trying to have more nuanced conversation based on research that we've done, or our expertise in our professional lives. If you're looking for console warring, if you're looking for WWE type commentary about the FTC crying, or the judge just hit the FTC attorney with a rock bottom, you're in the wrong place. Just go somewhere else.
That would be funny to see, though.
That would be funny to
That
see.
would be very funny to see.
Yeah, and you just,
Hey.
I mean, I understand how you're trying to maybe smooth out the wrinkle, and I get it. And I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I followed you for some years now, and I get it and understand. I think what we're just trying to convey is there's a certain level of gaming conversation that's out there. People are welcome to have it. We just want to make sure we don't do false advertising and just clearly convey that that's just not what we do here. If this was that type of podcast, I would not be here.
Oh yeah, you definitely wouldn't be here, Logic. I know that for a fact.
Yeah,
you definitely wouldn't be here. Yeah, no,
At risk of shifting the focus along, mainly because I don't have a lot of time left. Some other points that I did want to just touch on with regards to this whole process, and just sort of alluding to what I was saying before as an example, there's an impetus for the regulatory bodies and the companies that are involved in this. And again, it always seems to come down to Microsoft versus Sony. Well, it's not Microsoft, it's Xbox. And it's not Sony, it's PlayStation. Yes, they've got dads with big pockets that can help them out, but they're competing in totally different... The only similarity is that they both offer gaming in a console space. Everything else about their business strategies is totally different. Now, I personally think Xbox management is pissing away a really great opportunity to be a lot more than what they are. And that's through poor management and horrible practices. But that's just my perspective of it, from a professional opinion. And I think PlayStation does have some ability to be better at what they do as well. However, there's the outcome of what happens here will either be there's a limit to what we can do, what they can do, companies can do in terms of consolidation, and specifically from a platform holder's perspective, not necessarily others, but from a platform holder's perspective, and what they can and can't do in terms of consolidation. And it'll either be a nuclear option that gets us to the worst possible scenario as fast as possible, where one of them just ceases to exist. And I have a very strong opinion about which one that will be, but I'm not going to share it because it'll kick off a lot of arguments. The other option to that is that it'll get to a point where there's only a certain amount of consolidation which can happen, which is not a bad thing. It's not a good thing, but it's not the worst thing. But what a lot of people, again, still do not consider is Microsoft gets ABK and then everybody else lines up to be bought out. But that's the companies, not the individuals. And the culture of an organization is quite critical in maintaining a very productive and a very happy workforce. And no one is even considering this discussion around if Microsoft, and it popped up in some tweets yesterday, but no one previously considered, Microsoft buys ABK, all the talent can walk out at a moment's notice. And it's currently happening. A heap of people have left Microsoft. A heap of
that
people
was
have left.
actually, I'm sorry, Fucky, that was actually an email from, forget who it was at PlayStation, Jim Ryan, that mentioned that there would be an exodus in talent.
Yeah, and it's already happening. And I put a post up months ago and got shouted down for it because, I could see what was happening and see what was coming, and got told that's not going to ever happen. That's wrong. You got shouted down and boo-booed for it, and turned out I was right because I was actually paying attention to what was going on and listening to the right people who knew what they were talking about, not influencers who have no clue. So they'll all walk out. And in the current environment, even with the downturn that's happening in parts of Europe and parts of North America and other places, there are companies that are laying off talent because they just don't want to have them because they've got budgets that they need to meet. That's unavoidable, and that's sad, and I feel sorry for those people who, no fault of their own, suddenly don't have a job tomorrow. There are also companies that are taking advantage of the funding that is being available through the growth of the gaming industry, where the traditional funding models aren't the only place to get money. There are others that are looking at it, wanting to invest in it, and that is continuing. What might happen with the mass consolidation is a heap of people exit these organizations that are basically the creative talent. Let's not forget, gaming is a creative art form. It takes somebody, you can't just pick it up off a piece of paper and make it work. It takes somebody to think out and plan out how the thing's going to work and is it going to be any good and who it's going to appeal to. Because we all see these games that are basically cookie cutter, copy and paste. They're almost exactly the same. They just wheel out another one every year. And when they make a fundamental change is when the thing really explodes, and then it peters off, and then every couple of years they change it. If you've got all these creative minds exiting these big organizations, and it leaves them with a shell of people to basically fumble through and try and recreate that magic, and they all filter out and do their own little thing. If you've got big corporations looking at big tier 2 publishers and buying them up, where does all the talent end up? It ends up being scattered around in smaller chunks, and then you've got to try and corral them into a totally different model. Streaming works great for the big guys to a degree when they own the content. It's not great for the tier 2 because they lose out too much money. But when you get down to the lower end, where all this talent's going to filter out to somewhere else, they're not going to necessarily jump ship to another big publisher organization. They go out and form these 10, 15, 20, 30 person studios, and they're trying to get a game up and running, and then they're trying to monetize that game. What options are going to be left for them? Are they going to have to do free-to-play with microtransactions and advertising, which means they're going to have to run it through one of these big guys that have got that capacity? Or are they going to look for a model that says, hey, we can still sell games here. We can provide them complete games and people will purchase them. Because there will be a market, regardless of what Microsoft tries to do in the future, for at least the next decade, there will still be a market where Nintendo and Sony can create a console and sell it to a market of people and sell games on those consoles. That's not going to change overnight. And that might not change for 10, 15, 20 years plus. Because there's still a demographic that want to purchase and consume their entertainment in that manner. DVDs were supposed to die out when Netflix went over to streaming and everybody else jumped over it too. Yes, they've dropped off, but they haven't disappeared. CDs, same deal. Music streaming, no, they haven't disappeared. Vinyl's making a comeback. Why is vinyl making a comeback?
I was going to say vinyl's making a comeback. Like I see it everywhere now.
So there's still a demographic that appreciate that particular point of it. Like we have this the argument pops up on Twitter every second day. Oh, there's no physical version for that game. Why not? Oh, we should always have physical. We should never have gone to digital. There's arguments both ways. Having them digital means they're not likely to get broken, but it does mean that you might not be able to access them if you can't get the power to work or whatever, connection or whatever. They're in your library, you own them, but you own the license to access it. It could be taken away at any time, but the same thing could happen with a disc where your kids could get it and bend it and break it, and then you're out of luck. There's pros and cons all over the place for it. But it comes down to how the consumer wants to consume that product. If there's more offerings available, that's great, but there needs to be value. There needs to be a value proposition to engage people to buy it. And if the games are rubbish, people won't buy them. But if the games are rubbish and they're in a subscription service and old mate's got his couple of $100,000 for making it, well, that's great. You'll end up with a subscription service that looks like a mobile gaming thing like Apple Play or whatever. It'll just be 90% garbage, and then people will get turned off from having to try and filter through it, and then it permeates into a bigger issue. But the nucleus of the point I'm trying to make is that there's no guarantee that by buying the companies, you are going to maintain the talent that's in them. The only example I can give of a counter to that is when Sony got Bungie, and they said it's a $6.2 billion deal. We're only actually paying 2-point-something billion to buy it. The rest of the money is in retention bonuses for people that want to stick it out. And some of that key talent, when they get to the end of that 5-year deal, are going to get $1 million checks for hanging around for 5 years. Right? It's a very well constructed point to make sure that when they got them, that they didn't lose the talent. Because Sony wanted the talent, Bungie wanted access to Sony's marketing and Sony's additional entertainment stuff. So they could have done it with a partnership, but they chose to be closer than just an investment partnership or a signed deal. They wanted to actually be right in under the umbrella for other reasons.
Yeah,
that may work for some, it doesn't work for others, but that's the point is you can't confirm or deny whether the talent will stick around, and if the talent exits, what are you left with?
So one of the things I want to loop back to is just to piggyback on what you were saying, Falky, is right. the expanding ripples of the impact, right, of this. What I was starting to talk about was, we hyper focus on this conversation, again, not saying us, but just the gaming community in general, on how this impacts the gaming community, the gaming market. But we've alluded a couple times during the show to precedent, right? And what signal this sends to corporations in multiple industries, what signal this sends to the big tech five, right? And so one of the things that needs to also be taken into consideration is that, once a $70 billion, and I'm not saying this is a reason to approve or not approve a merger, I'm saying this is the dynamic, right, of the environment. Once a $70 billion merger is approved with all of the considerations taken into account on how this may have been considered anti-competitive, that sends the signal to the big tech five and lots of other companies. I think we're also going to see moving to the top of the pile, not the top of the pile, but moving into the upper ranks, a lot of these big media conglomerations. That sends a signal that it's open season, right? That type of thing is approvable. And so the risk that it imparts, right, is that we're going to continue to see consolidation in other markets as well, and particularly in media markets and entertainment markets.
Logic, Hollywood warned us of this, by the way. The Watani Corporation?
Wayland Yutani.
Yeah, I mean...
Blade Runner.
Blade Runner. I mean, like, Hollywood's been, like, we talked about AI earlier. Hollywood warned us about AI. Hollywood warned us about mass consolidation and having these big corporate conglomerates have influence over government.
Well, and this is like the analogy that I drew yesterday, too, right? Everybody keeps saying, oh, well, this is going to allow for innovation in the cloud game streaming market, right? Well, cloud game streaming market is always going to home back to the infrastructure providers, which means the CSPs, right? And the analogy that I draw is we allowed mass consolidation to occur in the music industry. And then what there is no consolidation believers, right, try and convince you is, oh, but all these streaming services, right, came to play. And so there was innovation and we did create, additional suppliers. And I'm like, no. What you need to understand is when you pull that thread is all that, the streaming corporations, the streaming companies, they're streaming that content because they're paying the big music record labels and publishers. So all of that money, it's taken some time, but the record labels have wormed their way around to also capturing all of that revenue, or a big chunk of it. So yes, there's another middleman getting paid, but I think we also have a long history in this country of how middlemen involved in the supply chain also isn't great. Multiple layers of people getting their palms greased, right, as things come out of a production pipeline is not at the end of the day good for consumers. It just increases and compiles costs along the way.
Yeah, because you have someone else that you need to pay, yeah.
I've got an interesting point just to add on to the back end of what Hamp just said. And again, I'm very fond of music and involved in music circles. I'm not just into gaming, I'm into a lot of other things as well. You will note that artists like Sting and Queen and who was the other one? I can't remember the other couple. Where there's a couple of Bruce Springsteen and a couple of others have completely sold off the rights to their music. Like completely sold it. They have absolutely no right, no say, no anything at all to their music, and they've sold it for hundreds of millions, if not, I think Queen went for 1.2 or 1.3 billion dollars. And the question gets asked, why would they want to do that? Why would they want to surrender and get rid of their rights to their music? And the reason is because it's not worth a damn if you're not touring. They make nothing. My sister's an artist, a musical artist. She makes nothing out of streaming. Absolutely nothing. She makes nothing out of her album sales. She makes nothing out of record sales. She makes nothing out of anything like that. The only way she makes money and gets money is when she's either paid by the producer to go and record more music, and that is bugger all, because it's basically an hourly rate while she's in the session, or she's out touring, where she can get a percentage of ticket sales or percentage of gate takings plus a minimum amount for doing the work, because she's not at the behest of the agency or the record producer. She's doing it for herself. Now, there are rules and laws around. If you've got copyright laws that allow you to maintain ownership over the what you've done, provided that you haven't done it and been paid for it by somebody else, because it's effectively paid work. You write a song for Sony BMG own that song. You don't own it. You might have created it, but you don't own it. You wrote it for yourself, different story. But there's copyright laws that prohibit that, that protect that. But if you can't tour in this day and age, and Taylor Swift's on a massive world tour at the moment, and she's going to make big dollars out of that for someone. She might not get it all herself, but someone that big still makes bugger all money herself out of all the streaming that happens. And that's why certain artists refuse to put their songs in the streaming services where they had the option. Queen's probably never going to do a massive world tour again. Why not take the $1 billion on offer and enjoy it for the rest of your life? Same with Bruce Springsteen and Sting and all these other guys. Why not do it? Because it's not worth a damn to you when they're streaming it. And it'll be the same. That same instance can be applied across anything where there's a streaming option available. So is it ingenuity? Yeah, it is, but it's not for the artist. It's not a benefit for the artist. It's a benefit for the person the middleman who can own it and action it. And it's all big corporations. Independents can, make nothing out of it.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned like these artists. Like, it's funny. Snoop Dogg went on a rant about streaming services. How he's like, you could have 1 billion streams and not even make $1 million. Like, make it make sense, basically. And he talked about his days, like when they were selling records and they get it. I mean, artists made more money off record sales, believe it or not. They made up a lot of money in the '90s off record sales. But you're right. Like a lot of artists
Elvis.
Said, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, Elvis and Michael Jackson are the top two by a long way in terms of albums sold, record sales. By a long way. Taylor Swift is one of the hottest artists, and Beyonce is the same. One of the top selling touring artists on the planet is not even going to go close to catching either of those guys. Not even close, because of the streaming services. Those guys made a bundle out of selling stuff, and they had less people to sell to than what's currently consuming via streaming. Does it mean the quality is improved? Not necessarily. Does it mean the experience is improved? Not necessarily. It just means the access is easier, but it's not benefiting the artist at all. So where's the incentive for the artist to show up again? This harks back to what Hemp was saying before about the competition piece of doing something that competes. Where's the incentive for the artists to show up and try and do something if they've got to compete against, the top 20 Spotify streaming list for this week is basically whatever people want to hear this week? How do you get noticed on these streaming services if you're not paying out of your own pocket, or you're not being managed by one of the big organizations that's going to pay you nothing anyway? Where's the value?
Yeah, that's a great point. Logic, before I wrap up the show, I just want to give you the last word here. Any additional thoughts?
No, man. I think we cooked.
We did cook. We did. We cooked. We cooked. Yeah, that's we definitely did.
I do want to say one thing. I'm not sure if they're still in the chat, but I just want to give a shout to Bor Country.
Yeah, Bor was here for a little bit. Yeah. Viceroy says, isn't Beyonce a billionaire now? I don't know. She might be because of her affiliation her marriage to Jay-Z, maybe.
If she is a billionaire, it's not because of streaming.
Yeah, it's not because of streaming. It's because of other. Yeah. Go ahead, Falky.
I was just saying, it's not because of streaming; it's because of touring.
Yeah, and other business ventures.
Last year,
other business ventures she has as well.
Yeah. So Bon Jovi was the highest grossing touring artist last year, doing 250 something shows in 365 days for the year globally, and brought in $700 and something million for that tour, and made $30 million off streaming.
Oh wow!
So there's your disparity.
Yeah. So Falky, I gotta get you back on again, man. Probably the next couple of days if you're available, because there is something that I want to discuss Nintendo related. So
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's something I want to talk about. It's a tweet that I put out there to get people kind of thinking about Nintendo a little bit. And but anyhow, yeah. So look, want to thank everyone in the live chat for hanging out with us this evening. Really appreciate it. Geez, we went like 3 hours. It doesn't feel like 3 hours. It went by fast. And thank you, Capono. I appreciate that. Also want to give up. Actually, do me a favor. Smash that like button. But we have 54 likes. Come on. We have like 128 people watching right now. I think at one point, total views according to YouTube, total number of times the stream was viewed while it was live, 1,032. So thank you. But please smash that like button. If you're new, subscribe, hit the What's up, Basher? Great to see Basher in the live chat. But please do me a favor, smash that like button, hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. And thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us this evening. Really appreciate it. Falky. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna attempt to introduce a new tradition to the show. So while I ask the panel this, I would suggest the chat drop your answers in the chat. What are you guys playing this weekend?
Oh, I know what I'm playing. A little Final Fantasy 16. That's what I'm playing.
Nice. What about you, Falky?
I am committed to helping my son get through his first attempt at Kingdom Hearts 2.
Oh, nice.
He's currently experiencing those, which is great because I actually never played it before. So,
damn. So a lot of Squeenix going on with the panel. Love to see it.
Exactly. Yeah. What about you, Logic?
I actually don't know. I'm very. I've been playing Call of Duty a lot. Spent about the last 5 days or so playing Call of Duty. I was gonna switch over to my Nintendo Switch tonight, or play something on mobile, but I'm actually just undecided right now. This is why I put Elite Dangerous. I know I've been saying I need to play more Space Sims and Flight Sims this year, so I don't know. I'm just very undecided right now.
What you should be playing on the Switch is this year's Game of the Year. Tears of the Kingdom.
I can't do it, man. Couldn't be me.
Come on, man. It's Game of the Year.
It's too much crafting.
It's not that much crafting. That's pretty funny, though.
I actually agree with Hamp.
Come on, Falky. Come on.
Breath of the Wild, and I played 20 hours of Breath of the Wild, and I never enjoyed it. And Tears of the Kingdom doesn't. I played a demo, and it's not for me, all right? And something that a lot of people need to get used to with gaming, and it's a final thought. I know what games I like, and that means and with my limited time, I will play the games I like. Just because I haven't played another game does not give me the right to say that game is rubbish. It's just not a game that I like to play. Likewise, I expect others to be equally as accommodating. I'm not a big fighting game person. I suck at fighting games. There's people that live and die fighting games only. Like, hey, great for you, not for me. That doesn't mean I hate it. It's just not something I like. So it doesn't have to be the polar opposite.
Yeah. No, it's a great point, Fuck. It's a great point, man.
And even with that, like I often advocate, people should still. I mean, I agree and have the same mentality as Falky, but I still advocate that people should, try out some different things, but you don't. But I also don't say you have to go way outside like your comfort zone or your wheelhouse. I would say maybe because I've commented a few times this year about yes, it's the best year in gaming, but it's the best year in gaming with everybody playing big AAA titles. Maybe take a look at the Mage Seeker, which I think is a super interesting game with very interesting combat. That's differentiated from kind of your straightforward even maybe than some of your Metroidvanias and stuff. So, but yeah, I am excited for Armored Core in August. I don't know that I'm going to play it, but I'm glad to see a title like that on the market. So I'm interested to see if it sticks the landing.
Had to throw that in there at the end.
Well, it's been over 10, 12 years or something since we got the last one.
It's been a long time.
Awesome. I got asked the other day what games would I like to see a full-on remake of, and I whipped out the old Future Cop LAPD, and the amount of people that closet love that game that just come out of the woodwork was astounding. I thought I was the only person who liked that game, so I'm pumped for Armored Core. I'm absolutely pumped for Armored Core because of that, because we never get those mech games anymore.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's one of the things I'm excited about for Armored Core, because we don't really get those mech games that much anymore. It's a great point. But gosh, I wish Microsoft would bring back Mech Assault 2. By the way, that was a great mech game. But Bill, anyhow, look, everyone, thank you. Seriously, thank you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Again, smash that like button and hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. So subscribe first and then hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. Game Logic, Falky, thank you so much. Appreciate your time as always, gentlemen. Falky, I'm gonna tap you on the shoulder again the next couple of days, by the way, because I got more to talk about. I
know. I've got some capacity over the weekend to jump in and have a chat, but just give me more than 5 minutes notice. That'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you so much, by the way. I know it was last minute, and I'm like, wait, Falky might be awake. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All good, mate. And great to chat to you, and Hamp, mate, great to catch up again. Sorry if I was talking too much in this one, but yeah, I love sharing thoughts with you guys.
No, definitely appreciate the conversation as always. It's always great having you on the show. So thank you. All right, everyone. Yeah, if you're not following me on Twitter, give me a follow at BRAP_podcast, and that way I always put up the link when we are about to go live. That way you're alerted. Also subscribe to the channel so you're alerted when we go live as well. So, but other than that, I'll probably be back in the next day or two, maybe. I think I'm not sure if there's Crossfire tomorrow. I think if there is, I'll be on Crossfire tomorrow night on Mooch's channel at 7 p.m. Eastern time. But until then, we'll see you next time. Thank you.